Stop, it's a trap. Don't take Canyon Road, they're going to kill every one of you. The scream tore across the highway before anyone could process what was happening. A barefoot girl, no older than 18, blonde hair matted with dust, sprinted directly into the path of 27 roaring motorcycles. She didn't stop at the shoulder. She didn't wave from a safe distance. She ran straight into the road, arms flailing, throwing her whole body between death and 27 strangers who had no idea her warning would save their lives. Before we go further, if stories about real courage, real justice, and real family move you the way they move me, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from tonight. I read every single one, and I want to see how far this story travels. Jack Callahan had ridden through combat zones in Fallujah, where a wrong turn meant an IED, where a civilian running toward your convoy usually meant something was very wrong. 22 years later, sitting on a Harley Road King outside a gas station that hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint since the Clinton administration, every instinct he'd buried in the desert of Iraq clawed its way back to the surface the instant he saw that girl's eyes. Fear like that couldn't be performed. He'd seen actors try. He'd seen junkies fake it for money. This was different. This was the fear of someone who had already accepted she might die, trying to warn people who would never believe her. "Everybody hold up!" Jack's voice cut through the rumble of engines like a blade. He didn't shout it as a suggestion. 22 years as a Marine road captain had trained his voice to carry command even through open-face helmets and wind noise. "Kill your engines. Now." Behind him, the column of Hell's Angels slowed in ragged formation, bikes drifting to the gravel shoulder in a scatter of chrome and leather. Some riders were already laughing. Jack had some strung-out kid called Frankie Torres, a broad-shouldered rider with a gray goatee who'd been riding beside Jack for 11 years. "We got a schedule. Bobby's mom's expecting us at the memorial site by 4. "She's not strung out," Jack said, not taking his eyes off the girl who had collapsed to her knees in the middle of the asphalt chest, heaving blood seeping from cuts on the soles of her bare feet. "Look at her feet, Frankie. Look at what she just ran through to get in front of us." Diane Foster, one of only 3 women in the club, and a former Army nurse, was already off her bike before Jack finished the sentence. She knelt beside the girl on the scorching pavement, heat radiating up through the asphalt in visible waves. "Sweetheart, look at me," Diane said, voice gentle but firm, the same voice she'd used on wounded soldiers who didn't know yet how bad it was. "You're safe. Nobody's going to hurt you, but I need you to breathe. Can you do that for me?" The girl's whole body trembled. Her lips were cracked sunburn, and when she tried to speak, her voice came out as barely more than a rasp. "You don't understand," she whispered. "They're waiting, right now, on Canyon Road. They've been waiting for weeks for a group big enough, a group like yours." "Who's waiting?" Jack asked, crouching down to her level, keeping his 6'2" frame as unthreatening as possible. "I don't know all their names," the girl said, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "But I know what they're planning. I saw them build it. I saw them practice it. They're going to bring the canyon down on you. And if that doesn't work, they've got rifles up on both ridges." A ripple of silence moved through the group faster than the earlier laughter had. Somebody let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Rifles, explosives, lady, you've been reading too many action movies." The girl's head snapped toward the voice, and for a moment something other than fear flashed across her face. Something closer to fury. "You think I ran 2 miles on broken glass and gravel 'cause I wanted attention?" Her voice cracked, but it held. "Look at my feet. Does this look like a joke to you?" Jack looked down. Her feet were shredded, streaked red, one heel bleeding freely enough that a small dark pool had already formed on the pavement beneath her. Nobody fabricated that kind of pain for a prank. "What's your name?" Jack asked quietly. "Lily," she said. "Lily Carter." "Okay, Lily." Jack kept his tone level, the same tone he used to calm rattled young Marines under fire. "I believe something happened to you. I believe you're scared. But I need you to help me understand exactly what you saw. Because right now, 26 people behind me think I've lost my mind for stopping." Lily's eyes darted behind him, taking in the sea of leather vests, tattooed arms, sun-weathered faces staring at her, with everything from suspicion to pity. She swallowed hard. 3 men, she said. "I've watched them for almost 2 weeks. They come out to Canyon Road at night, always after midnight, always in a black pickup with the plates covered in mud on purpose. They've been drilling explosive charges into the rock face on the east wall right where the road narrows into that blind curve past the old mining marker. How would a homeless kid know what explosive charges look like? Frankie asked, not unkindly but skeptically. Because my grandfather worked demolition for 30 years before he passed. Lily said, chin lifting slightly, some of the fire returning to her voice despite the exhaustion. He used to take me to job sites when I was little. I know what detonation cord looks like. I know what a charge pattern looks like when someone's trying to bring down a rock face onto a specific target zone instead of just clearing debris. This wasn't mining work. This was murder dressed up to look like an accident. Diane looked up at Jack, something unspoken passing between them. 20 years of riding together had built a language beyond words. She's not lying, Diane said quietly. Or if she is, she believes every word of it. There's more, Lily said, her voice dropping, eyes glancing nervously toward the tree line as though the men she described might materialize out of the desert scrub at any moment. They talked about riflemen. 2 positions, one on each ridge overlooking the canyon. I heard one of them, the leader, I think, say something about making sure there's, quote, nobody left to file a police report. The words landed like a physical blow. Even the skeptics went quiet. They're not doing this for kicks, Lily continued, forcing herself to keep talking, even as her body swayed with exhaustion and dehydration. I heard them talk about your patches, your bikes. They said something about a group this size carrying serious cash and gear, high-end motorcycles worth stealing and reselling jewelry weapons. They've been watching motorcycle clubs on social media for months, tracking which ones post their ride routes publicly. They knew you were coming. They knew today. They knew Canyon Road. Jack felt something cold settle in his stomach, a feeling he hadn't experienced since a forward operating base briefing 17 years earlier, when intelligence confirmed an ambush waiting on a supply route his unit had already announced they'd be using. Our route, Jack said slowly. It's posted, has been for 3 weeks. Public memorial ride open invitation for veterans and their families. That's how they knew, Lily said. That's how they always know. Frankie's earlier skepticism had drained from his face entirely. Jack, if there's even a 5% chance this kid is telling the truth. There's more than a 5% chance, Jack cut in, standing up, scanning the horizon toward the mouth of Canyon Road, visible in the shimmering heat about 2 miles ahead, where the highway cut between 2 rust-colored rock walls. Look at her feet, Frankie. Look at the fear in her eyes. That's not an act. Nobody fakes that kind of terror for attention. A tense murmur spread through the group. 27 riders, men and women who had faced down bar fights, corrupt cops, and rival clubs without flinching, suddenly found themselves staring at a homeless teenager who claimed to have uncovered a professional ambush. So what do we do? Asked Marcus Webb, the youngest full member of the club at 29, a former Army Ranger who joined the Hells Angels 3 years earlier after struggling to find purpose outside the military. We can't just barrel through if there's even a chance she's right. We're not riding through, Jack said, his voice hardening into the decisive tone that had made him road captain in the first place. Not until we know exactly what we're dealing with. And if she's wrong, Frankie asked, though the question had lost most of its earlier edge. If this is some kind of misunderstanding, or worse, a setup by somebody who wants to rob us using a scared kid as bait. Jack considered this. It was a fair question. 22 years in the military had taught him to consider every angle, including the possibility of deception layered inside apparent innocence. Lily, Jack said, turning back to her, I have to ask you something, and I need you to understand I'm not trying to hurt you by asking it. Is anyone paying you to tell us this? Did anyone put you up to this? The look on Lily's face wasn't offense. It was something closer to devastating exhaustion. The look of someone who had expected exactly this question and had run out of energy to be hurt by it. Nobody sent me, she said quietly. Nobody's paying me. Nobody even knows I'm here except the men on that mountain. And if they see me talking to you right now, they'll know I told someone. Do you understand what that means for me? I have no home, no family, no phone to call anyone for help. If I'm wrong about you believing me, I don't just lose credibility. I lose my life. The weight of that statement seemed to physically press down on the gathered riders. A few exchanged uneasy glances. She's not asking for anything, Diane said softly, still kneeling beside Lily, one hand resting protectively on the girl's shoulder. She's not asking for money. She's not asking for a ride. She ran 2 miles on broken glass to stop strangers from dying. Think about that for 1 second before anyone accuses her of lying. Jack turned to face his club, 26 pairs of eyes watching him, waiting for a decision that would define the next several hours, possibly the rest of their lives. "Here's what we're going to do," Jack announced, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had led convoys through hostile territory and never lost a single Marine under his direct command. "Marcus, Diane, you're with me. We're going to take the drone up and get eyes on that canyon before anybody rides through it. Frankie, you're in charge of securing Lily and keeping everyone else here at the station." "Jack, that's a 2-mile hike into open desert in 106 degrees, Frankie said. "If there really are riflemen up there, then we'll see them before they see us," Jack said. "I didn't survive 2 deployments by walking blind into unknown terrain, and I'm not about to start now." Marcus was already unstrapping a hard case from the back of his bike, the compact commercial drone he'd bought 2 years earlier for filming club rides, now suddenly serving a very different purpose. "Give me 10 minutes to get this bird in the air," Marcus said, hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the tension radiating through the group. "If there's anything up on those ridges, thermal imaging will pick it up even from altitude." While Marcus worked, Diane helped Lily to a patch of shade beside the gas station's crumbling overhang, offering her water from a canteen, watching the girl drink, with the desperate urgency of someone who hadn't had clean water in longer than she wanted to admit. "When's the last time you ate something?" Diane asked, unable to keep the concern out of her voice despite the danger surrounding them all. "I don't remember," Lily admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "How long have you been out here?" "Living rough, I mean," Diane pressed gently. 14 months, Lily said, staring at the ground, shame flickering across her face despite everything she'd just risked to save strangers. "Since my grandmother died." Diane's jaw tightened, but she said nothing, understanding instinctively that now wasn't the moment to unpack 14 months of suffering. Now was the moment to survive whatever was waiting on Canyon Road. Marcus's drone lifted off with a soft electronic whine, climbing rapidly into the shimmering afternoon sky, banking toward the canyon in the distance. "Feeds up," Marcus called, tilting his tablet so Jack could see the live video transmission. "Give me a second to get altitude." The gathered riders crowded closer, tension crackling through the group as the drone's camera swept over the desert landscape, rust-colored rock formations rising on either side of the narrow highway that cut through Canyon Road roughly a mile and a half ahead. "There," Marcus said, suddenly voice sharpening. "East wall about 40 feet up. You see that?" On the screen, barely visible against the natural rock coloring, small dark shapes were embedded into crevices along the rock face, connected by thin lines that could easily be mistaken for shadow or mineral veining to an untrained eye. "Explosive charges," Jack said quietly, all doubt draining from his voice. She was right. A collective intake of breath moved through the group. "Push the drone higher," Jack ordered. "I want to see both ridges." Marcus adjusted the controls, sending the drone climbing above the canyon walls, camera panning slowly across the rugged terrain flanking the road. "There, Marcus's voice had gone tight. "West ridge, 2 o'clock position." The camera zoomed in on a shape that was unmistakably human, crouched behind a natural rock outcropping, something long and metallic catching sunlight in a way that could only be a rifle barrel. "Jesus Christ!" Frankie breathed, all trace of skepticism finally erased. She wasn't exaggerating. "There's actually somebody up there." "Get eyes on the east ridge too," Jack said, jaw clenched tight. Marcus swung the drone across the canyon, and within seconds, a second armed figure came into view, positioned with a clear line of sight down onto the highway below, precisely where a column of motorcycles would be forced to slow through the narrow curve. 2 shooters' explosive charges rigged to a rock face designed to funnel us into a kill zone, Jack said, voice flat with the particular calm that came from processing information too dangerous to react to emotionally. "This isn't a robbery. This is a planned execution." Behind him, Lily had gone very still, watching the tablet screen with an expression that mixed vindication with pure terror. "I told you," she whispered. "I told you they were serious." "You saved every single one of us," Diane said, gripping the girl's shoulder firmly. "Do you understand that if we'd ridden through there without stopping—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Jack's straightened mind already shifting into tactical mode, calculating options with the same clarity that had once kept his Marines alive through ambush far deadlier than most civilians could imagine. Local police are compromised, Jack said suddenly, the realization hitting him with uncomfortable clarity. What makes you say that? Frankie asked. Think about it, Jack said. This operation required weeks of planning. Explosive charges don't get planted overnight, and rifle positions like that require reconnaissance and patience. Whoever's behind this either has serious resources or they have protection, making sure nobody comes looking too closely at what's happening out here in the middle of nowhere. Lily's head snapped up. The sheriff? She said suddenly. I saw him twice. The group went silent. You saw the county sheriff at the ambush site? Jack asked carefully. I didn't know it was him at first, Lily said, voice shaking slightly. But there was a patrol car, unmarked, parked near where they were working one night. A man got out wearing a uniform. I watched him shake hands with the one they called Derek, the leader. They talked for almost 20 minutes before the patrol car left. Jack exchanged a look with Diane that conveyed more than words could express. If local law enforcement is involved, Jack said slowly, then calling 911 right now could get every one of us killed, and it could get this girl killed even faster. So what do we do? Marcus asked, still watching the drone feed with white-knuckled focus. We can't just sit here, and we can't ride through blind. Jack's mind raced through possibilities, weighing options with the same calculated precision that had once meant the difference between a successful mission and a body bag. I know someone, Jack said finally. Special Agent Rachel Kim, FBI. She helped us with a veteran fraud case 2 years back. She's stationed out of the Phoenix field office. If this involves local corruption, federal jurisdiction is our only clean option. You think she'll believe us? Frankie asked. A story about explosives and dirty sheriffs from a motorcycle club and a homeless teenager. She'll believe drone footage of armed men and explosive charges, Jack said grimly. That's not a story, that's evidence. He pulled out his phone, hands steady despite the situation, and dialed a number he hadn't used in over a year. The call rang twice before a professional voice answered. Special Agent Kim. Rachel, it's Jack Callahan. I need you to listen very carefully, and I need you to trust me because what I'm about to tell you is going to sound insane. Over the next several minutes, Jack laid out everything Lily's warning. The drone footage of the explosive charges, the armed men positioned on both ridges, and the possible involvement of local law enforcement. The line went quiet for a long moment after he finished. Send me that drone footage right now, Agent Kim said. Finally, her voice sharpened into something all business. And Jack, don't engage. Don't approach. If what you're describing is accurate, this is a coordinated ambush, and if local law enforcement is compromised, we can't risk tipping them off before we have federal assets in position. How long until you can get here? Jack asked. Closest tactical team is out of Tucson. 90 minutes if we push hard. I need you to keep everyone away from that canyon and keep this girl safe. She's your only witness, and if what you're telling me is true, she's also a target the moment they realize she talked. Jack looked over at Lily, who was watching him with wide, exhausted eyes, clearly hearing enough of the conversation to understand the danger she'd placed herself in. Understood, Jack said. We'll hold position. He ended the call and turned to face his club, 26 riders waiting for direction, their earlier skepticism completely replaced by grim resolve. FBI's inbound, Jack announced. 90 minutes. Until then, nobody goes near that canyon, and nobody, and I mean nobody, breathes a word of this on social media, radio, or anywhere else that could tip off whoever's watching. What about her? Frankie asked, nodding toward Lily. If they realize she's missing, or if they see us all stopped here instead of riding through. That's exactly what worries me, Jack said. We need to get her somewhere safe, somewhere they won't think to look. Diane was already moving, helping Lily to her feet, despite the girl's obvious pain. She's coming with me, Diane said firmly. I've got medical supplies in my saddlebag, and she needs those feet cleaned and bandaged before infection sets in. As Diane guided Lily toward her motorcycle, the girl suddenly stopped, turning back toward Jack with an expression that mixed gratitude with disbelief. You actually believe me, she said, almost like she couldn't quite process the reality of it. Nobody's believed me about anything in over a year. Jack met her eyes steadily. You ran through broken glass and gravel to save the lives of complete strangers. That's not the behavior of someone lying. That's the behavior of someone with more courage than most adults I've served with. Something shifted in Lily's expression, a crack in the exhausted armor she'd built over 14 months of being ignored, dismissed, and forgotten by everyone who should have helped her. Nobody's ever said anything like that to me before, she whispered. Well, get used to it, Diane said gently, guiding her toward the shade of a parked truck. Because we're not going anywhere until this is finished, and neither are you. As Diane began cleaning the cuts on Lily's feet with practiced medical efficiency, the rest of the club settled into tense positions around the gas station. Weapons legally concealed but readily accessible. Eyes scanning the horizon for any sign that their extended stop had drawn unwanted attention. Marcus kept the drone airborne, rotating its position to maintain surveillance on both ridge positions, watching for any movement that might indicate the armed men had noticed the column of motorcycles stopping well short of the ambush zone. They're not moving, Marcus reported after several minutes. Still holding position. I don't think they've clocked us yet. Keep it that way, Jack said, pacing near the edge of the gas station's cracked pavement mine, working through contingencies. If the ambush team realized their target had stopped and wasn't coming, would they abandon the operation or would they come looking for the reason why Jack? Frankie's voice carried a new edge of concern. Vehicle approaching from the east, coming in fast. Every head turned toward the horizon where a cloud of dust marked an approaching vehicle, still too distant to identify but closing quickly along the same highway they'd stopped on. Everybody stay calm, Jack said, though his own pulse had quickened. Could be nothing. Could be a local rancher, delivery truck, anything. But as the vehicle drew closer, details began resolving through the heat. Shimmer a black pickup truck, exactly matching the description Lily had given moments earlier, plates deliberately obscured with mud. That's them! Lily's voice cracked with sudden panic from where she sat beside Diane. That's the truck. That's Derek's truck. The pickup slowed as it approached the gas station, clearly registering the unusual sight of nearly 30 motorcycles gathered at a location they should have already passed through. Jack's hand moved instinctively toward his hip, though he kept his expression carefully neutral, projecting the casual confidence of a road captain dealing with nothing more unusual than a mechanical delay. The truck rolled to a stop roughly 40 yards away, engine idling, windows tinted too dark to see clearly inside. For a long, tense moment, nobody moved. Then the driver's window lowered halfway, revealing a man in his early 40s with close-cropped hair and cold, calculating eyes that swept across the gathered bikers with obvious suspicion. "Y'all having engine trouble," the man called out, voice carrying false friendliness that didn't quite mask the sharp assessment happening behind his eyes. "Just taking a break," Jack called back, keeping his tone easy despite every muscle in his body coiled with tension. "Long ride ahead of us. Figured we'd hydrate before pushing through the canyon." The man's eyes narrowed slightly, gaze drifting across the group until they landed with unmistakable recognition on Lily, who had gone rigid with terror beside Diane. "That's her," the man muttered loud enough for those nearby to hear before his expression shifted into something far more dangerous. The mini cliffhanger hung in the air like a held breath. Derek Holloway, the man who had planned to eliminate every witness on Canyon Road, had just identified the one witness who could destroy everything he'd built. Jack stepped forward, deliberately positioning his body between the truck and where Lily sat, his voice hardening into something that left no room for misinterpretation. "You need to move along," Jack said, his tone carrying the weight of command that had once controlled Marines under fire. "This is private conversation, and you're not part of it." The man in the truck studied Jack for a long moment, clearly recalculating whatever plan had been forming behind his cold eyes. 27 Hells Angels all standing between him and the girl who had seen too much represented odds he clearly hadn't anticipated. "No trouble here," the man said finally, though the threat underlying his words was unmistakable. "Just passing through. Y'all have a good ride." The truck's window rose back into place and the vehicle pulled away slowly, continuing east along the highway, but not before Jack caught a final glimpse of the driver's eyes fixed on Lily through the tinted glass, a look that promised this confrontation was far from finished. As the dust cloud from the departing truck faded into the distance, the tension didn't dissipate. If anything, it thickened, settling over the gathered riders like a physical weight. "He recognized her," Frankie said quietly. "He knows she talked." "Which means he knows his operation's compromised," Jack said, mind racing through implications. "Which means he might abandon Canyon Road and come after her directly." Lily had begun trembling uncontrollably, the adrenaline that had carried her through the desperate sprint, finally giving way to raw terror now that immediate danger had passed momentarily, but not permanently. "He's going to kill me," she whispered, voice barely audible. "He said he would if anyone ever found out." Diane wrapped a protective arm around the girl's shoulders. Nobody's touching you, Diane said fiercely. Not while we're standing here. Jack immediately redialed Agent Kim's number, updating her on the confrontation with Derek Holloway and the very real possibility that the ambush team might now shift tactics from waiting for the motorcycle club to actively hunting for their compromised witness. We need to move Lily somewhere more secure. Kim's voice came through sharp with urgency. Somewhere with better defensive positioning than an open gas station. There's an old ranger station about 2 miles south, Marcus offered, pulling up satellite imagery on his tablet. Abandoned for years, but the building's still standing. Concrete construction, limited access points. That works, Kim said. Get her there. I'm pushing our ETA up. We're rerouting the tactical team now that we have confirmation of direct threat escalation. As the club began organizing to relocate, splitting into groups to provide security, while Diane and 2 other riders escorted Lily toward the abandoned ranger station. Nobody noticed the second vehicle that had been watching the entire confrontation from a concealed position nearly a mile away. A man with binoculars relaying everything he witnessed back to someone whose voice carried far more authority than Derek Holloway's. They know, the watcher said into his radio. The girl talked. They've got federal agents inbound. A long pause followed before the response came through, cold and measured. Then we accelerate the timeline. If we can't have the bikers, we take the girl before the feds arrive. Dead witnesses don't testify. The order sent ripples of consequence across the desert landscape, setting in motion a race against time that would determine whether Lily Carter survived to see justice or whether 14 months of suffering and one desperate sprint across broken glass would end in the very tragedy she'd risked everything to prevent. As the convoy began moving toward the ranger station, engines rumbling in protective formation around Diane's motorcycle where Lily rode pressed close behind her, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that stopping the ambush had only been the opening move in something far larger and far more dangerous than any of them had initially realized. Somewhere in that desert, a corrupt sheriff's protection had allowed a criminal operation to flourish for years. Somewhere in that town, more people had looked away from Lily Carter's suffering than had ever offered to help. And somewhere between the canyon walls, where explosive charges still waited, and the ranger station where federal agents would soon converge, the true scope of what Derek Holloway's organization had built remained hidden, waiting to be exposed. The ranger station appeared through the shimmering heat exactly where Marcus's satellite imagery had promised, a squat concrete structure with boarded windows and a rusted metal door that Frankie forced open with practiced efficiency. Everybody inside. Jack ordered positioning riders at defensive points around the perimeter while Diane guided Lily through the doorway into the relative coolness of the abandoned building's interior. Dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight, filtering through gaps in the boarded windows as Diane finished bandaging Lily's feet, the girl finally sitting still long enough for proper medical attention now that immediate danger had temporarily receded. "You're safe here," Diane said gently, though the words felt somewhat hollow, given the truck that had already found them once. For now, at least. Lily stared at her bandaged feet, tears finally breaking through the exhausted composure she'd maintained through everything. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why are you helping me? Nobody else has in over a year." Diane paused, considering the question with the weight it deserved. "Because somebody should have helped you a long time ago," Diane said quietly. "And because you just proved you're braver than most people I've ever met. That's not something we walk away from." Outside the ranger station, Jack stood watch near the doorway, phone pressed to his ear as Agent Kim provided updates on the tactical team's approach, still nearly an hour out, despite pushing their vehicles well past normal speed limits. "Jack!" Marcus's voice carried urgency from where he'd positioned himself near the building's northern corner, tablet still displaying the drone's live feed. "The riflemen. They're moving." Jack's blood went cold. "Moving where?" "Off the ridges," Marcus said, voice tight with the concern. "Both positions. They're descending toward the highway." "They're abandoning the ambush," Jack realized aloud, "which means they're regrouping for something else." "Or someone else," Frankie added grimly, glancing toward the ranger station where Lily remained under Diane's protection. The mini cliffhanger settled over the group with crushing weight. The men who had planned to execute 27 bikers were now redirecting their deadly resources toward a single desperately vulnerable target, a homeless 18-year-old girl who had risked everything to save strangers and who now found herself the primary objective of men willing to kill anyone who threatened their operation. Jack's grip tightened on his phone as he relayed the development to Agent Kim, watching through the gaps in the ranger station's boarded windows as afternoon shadows lengthened across the desert each passing minute, bringing either salvation or catastrophe closer to the abandoned building where 27 bikers now stood as the only barrier between Lily Carter and the men determined to silence her forever. The rifleman's descent from the ridges sent a jolt of adrenaline through every rider stationed around the ranger station, and Jack Callahan's mind snapped instantly into the kind of tactical clarity that had once kept his entire fire team alive through 3 tours nobody talked about at family barbecues. "Marcus, keep that drone up," Jack barked, moving low along the concrete wall toward the northern corner, where Frankie had taken position with a pair of binoculars. "I want eyes on those two every second until Kim's team lands." "They're not rushing, Shaw," Marcus reported, voice tight with concentration as he adjusted the drone's altitude to keep both descending figures in frame. "Moving careful, methodical, like they know exactly where they're going." "That's what worries me," Jack muttered. Inside the ranger station, Diane had finished wrapping the last bandage around Lily's torn feet, and the girl sat with her knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped tight around her legs, rocking slightly in a way that told Diane the shock was finally catching up to her. "Hey!" Diane crouched in front of her, forcing eye contact. "Lily, look at me." Lily's eyes lifted glassy with exhaustion and fear. "They're coming for me, aren't they?" Diane didn't lie to her. She'd learned a long time ago back in a combat hospital in Kandahar that false comfort did more damage than honest fear. "Maybe," Diane said, "but you're not facing them alone. Not today, not ever again if I have anything to say about it." Something in Lily's face cracked at that, a fault line running straight through 14 months of learned isolation, and for a moment she looked less like a fugitive witness and more like exactly what she was, an 18-year-old girl who hadn't had anyone say something like that to her in over a year. "Why do you care?" Lily asked, voice small. "You don't even know me." Diane sat back on her heels, considering the question with the weight it deserved instead of brushing past it. "Because I know what it feels like to scream for help and watch people decide you're not worth believing," Diane said quietly. "I was an Army nurse, 2 tours, came home with injuries nobody could see, and for a long time the people who were supposed to help me looked right through me too. Different circumstances, same feeling." Lily stared at her, something shifting behind her exhausted eyes. 14 months, she said suddenly, like the number had been sitting in her throat waiting for permission to come out. 14 months since anybody looked at me the way you're looking at me right now. "Tell me," Diane said gently, "not because I need convincing, because I think you need to say it." Outside, Jack's radio crackled, and Agent Kim's voice, tight with urgency, cut through the tension building at the perimeter. "Jack, talk to me. Status. 2 hostiles moving off the ridgeline, heading in the general direction of the ranger station." Jack reported, eyes never leaving the horizon. "ETA on your tactical team. 40 minutes, and that's pushing every vehicle past redline," Kim said. "Jack, I need you to hold that position. Do not engage unless engaged. I don't want a civilian firefight on my hands when we're this close." "Copy that," Jack said, though the muscle ticking in his jaw betrayed exactly how difficult that order was going to be to follow if those 2 riflemen kept closing distance. Inside, Lily had begun talking, her voice hesitant at first, then gaining momentum as the words that had been trapped inside her for over a year finally found somewhere safe to land. "My grandmother raised me," she said, staring at a spot on the concrete floor like she could see the memory playing out there. "My mom left when I was 4. Never knew my dad. It was always just me and Grandma Ruth in this little house on Miners Row in Cottonwood Flats. She worked at the diner on Main Street for 31 years. Every single day, rain or shine, she put on that yellow apron and went to work so I could have new shoes for school." Diane listened without interrupting, recognizing the particular rhythm of someone finally being allowed to grieve out loud. "She got sick when I was 16, Lily continued, voice thickening. "Ovarian cancer, stage 3 by the time they caught it, because she'd been putting off doctor visits for years to save money for my school stuff. I used to get so mad at her for that. I used to yell at her, tell her she was being stupid, that nothing mattered more than her staying alive." Lily's voice cracked. "I didn't understand yet that she thought keeping me fed and clothed was the same thing as staying alive. That there wasn't a difference in her mind. How long did she fight it? Diane asked softly. 18 months, Lily said. I dropped out of school to take care of her during the last 6. Sat with her every night, held her hand through the chemo, through the radiation, through all of it. And then one Tuesday morning in April, she just didn't wake up. The silence that followed carried weight that no amount of desert heat outside could match. The medical bills came about 3 weeks after the funeral. Lily continued wiping her face with the back of her hand. I didn't even know how much debt she'd taken on trying to keep the treatments going. $211,000. I was 17. I didn't have a ma. I didn't have family. The bank had a lien on the house from a loan Grandma took out during her first round of chemo, and when I couldn't make the payments, they started foreclosure. They foreclosed on a dying woman's house while her granddaughter was still grieving her, Diane said, disgust evident in her voice. Nobody in that town lifted a finger. Lily said, bitterness creeping into her exhausted tone. I asked the church for help. The pastor told me they'd pray for me. I asked the school counselor if there was some kind of emergency fund. She gave me a pamphlet for a shelter 2 counties over that turned out to be full every single time I called. I asked Mr. Denning, who owned the hardware store where Grandma used to buy things on credit sometimes, if he had any work I could do. He looked right through me like I was already a ghost. Jack, standing near the doorway monitoring the perimeter, had drifted close enough to hear the last part of the conversation, and something in his expression had hardened into quiet fury. That's when you ended up on the street, Diane said, not really a question. The shelter in town was already at capacity, Lily said. 11 beds for a county with a homeless population 3 times that size. I stayed in the county library during the day because it was air-conditioned and nobody bothered me there. At night, I found the space under the old railroad trestle bridge outside town. It kept the rain off, mostly. 14 months, Diane repeated softly. 380-something days, Lily corrected a hollow attempt at dark humor. I started counting after the first month. Stopped counting somewhere around day 200 because it stopped feeling like it mattered. Outside, Frankie's voice suddenly cut through the conversation, sharp with alarm. Jack, movement 300 yards, closing fast. Jack spun weapon hand, instinctively dropping to his hip as he moved to the corner where Frankie had positioned himself, binoculars raised toward the desert scrub, where 2 figures moved with deliberate practiced stealth toward the ranger station's position. They found us, Jack said, voice dropping into the flat calm that always settled over him in the seconds before things went sideways. Marcus, get that drone lower. I need exact positioning. On it, Marcus said, hands flying across his tablet controls, and the drone banked sharply descending to get a clear angle on the approaching threat. Inside the ranger station, Lily's story had reached the part that mattered most, the part that had turned a homeless teenager into the only witness capable of unraveling an entire criminal network. But her voice caught as the tension outside bled through the boarded windows. What's happening? She asked, panic flooding back into her expression. Stay low. Stay with me, Diane said, firmly positioning her body between Lily and the doorway. Finish the story. I need to know everything you know right now in case something happens to either of us before the FBI arrives. The brutal practicality of that statement seemed to steady Lily rather than shatter her further, and she nodded, forcing herself to continue, even as her hands trembled. 2 weeks ago, maybe 17 days. I don't know exactly. I was collecting cans along the drainage ditch that runs parallel to Canyon Road. Lily said, words coming faster now, urgency replacing hesitation. It was late past midnight, and I saw headlights coming up the old service road that most people forget even exists anymore. I hid in the ditch because that's just instinct. After a while, you learn to disappear when vehicles show up at night. What did you see? Diane pressed. 3 men got out of a black pickup, Lily said. They had equipment, drilling tools, coils of wire, boxes I didn't recognize at the time, but figured out later were explosive charges once I watched them work over several nights. The leader, the one they called Derek, he was giving orders. Real specific, real particular about exactly where things needed to go. Outside, the 2 approaching figures had closed to within 200 yards, moving in a tactical spread that told Jack everything he needed to know about their training. These aren't amateurs, Jack said quietly to Frankie. Look at their spacing. Look at how they're using the terrain. Somebody trained these 2 properly. Military, Frankie asked. Or private security contractors, Jack said grimly. Which is worse because it means somebody with real money is bankrolling this operation. Marcus's voice cut in tight with new information. Jack, I'm running facial recognition through a public database using the drone's camera zoom. Might take a few minutes, but I think I've got a partial match on one of them. Do it, Jack said. Whatever you can get. Inside Lily's account had reached the moment that changed everything. The detail that transformed a simple demolition operation into something far larger and more sinister than criminal robbery. The third night I watched them, a car pulled up that wasn't the usual pickup, Lily said. A patrol car, unmarked, but I recognized the light bar on top, even without the markings showing. A man got out in a sheriff's department uniform, and Derek walked right up to him like they'd done this 100 times before. They shook hands. Derek handed him something, I couldn't see what, but it looked like an envelope, thick. And the sheriff, or whoever he was, he said something I'll never forget. What did he say? Diane asked, leaning closer. He said, make sure this one's clean. County can't afford another investigation looking too deep into what happens off Canyon Road. Not after last time. The words hung in the tense air of the ranger station like a physical weight. Last time, Diane repeated slowly. What does that mean? Has this happened before? I don't know, Lily admitted, but it sounded like it. Like this wasn't their first operation. Like there'd been other incidents that got covered up before. Outside, Jack's radio crackled with urgent information from Agent Kim. Jack, I need an update. My team's still 35 minutes out. We got 2 hostiles closing on our position, moving tactical, 200 yards and shrinking. Jack reported, voice steady despite the tightening situation. We're not engaging unless forced, but Rachel, if these 2 reach the building before your team arrives, I'm not going to just stand here and let them execute a teenager. There was a pause on the line, weighted with the impossible calculus of law enforcement protocol versus immediate human life. Understood, Kim said finally. Do what you need to do to protect that girl. I'll take responsibility for whatever happens. Just try to keep it contained if you can. Jack lowered the radio and turned to face his gathered riders, 26 men and women who had spent the last hour transforming from a memorial ride into something closer to a defensive militia, protecting a witness that federal law enforcement itself hadn't yet arrived to secure. Listen up, Jack said, voice carrying the same command presence that had once organized Marine squads through hostile territory. We are not the aggressors here. We hold position. We hold the perimeter. And if those 2 men force a confrontation, we respond with exactly the force necessary to protect that girl and nothing more. Are we clear? A chorus of grim affirmations rippled through the group, 26 people who had arrived that morning, expecting nothing more complicated than a memorial ride now standing ready to physically defend a stranger's life against professional killers. Marcus's voice suddenly cut through the tension with new urgency. Jack got a partial hit on facial recognition. The one on the left database match at 73% confidence name comes back as Victor Reyes, former private security contractor, dishonorable discharge from a private military company operating out of Nevada for excessive use of force during an overseas contract. So he's got training and no conscience, Frankie muttered. Wonderful. There's more. Marcus continued scrolling through information on his tablet. Reyes has a documented connection to a shell company called Desert Ridge Holdings, registered out of a P.O. box in Phoenix. Same company shows up in county property records for 3 parcels along Canyon Road that were purchased over the last 18 months. Jack's mind raced through the implications. This isn't just about robbing a motorcycle club, he said slowly. This is about land. Somebody's been buying up property and they needed Canyon Road cleared of witnesses, maybe cleared of obstacles entirely. Inside the ranger station, Lily's account continued, each detail adding weight to a conspiracy far larger than anyone had initially imagined. There's something else, Lily said, voice dropping. About a week after I first saw them, I overheard Derek on the phone. He was talking to somebody, and he said something about the development can't move forward until the road's secured. And once the buyers see its safe, prices triple overnight. Diane's expression sharpened. Development. Are you telling me somebody's planning to build something out here? I don't know what, Lily admitted, but it sounded big. It sounded like money, real money. Outside, Frankie's whispered warning cut through the building tension like a blade. Jack, 150 yards. They've stopped. Every rider tensed, weapons hands drifting to ready positions as the two approaching figures paused in the scrubland, apparently reassessing the situation now that they'd gotten close enough to see the full scope of resistance waiting for them. They weren't expecting this many of us holding position, Jack observed quietly. They were counting on catching one scared girl alone, maybe a couple of bikers at most. So what happens now? Frankie asked. As if in answer, one of the distant figures raised something to his shoulder, and Jack's blood ran cold as he recognized the unmistakable silhouette of a rifle being brought to bear. Down! Jack shouted the word tearing from his throat a fraction of a second before the crack of gunfire split the desert silence, a warning shot that kicked up dust 20 feet from the ranger station's perimeter. Every rider dropped into defensive positions, years of instinct kicking in even for those who'd never faced live gunfire outside of a range. That's a message, not an attack, Jack said, voice tight but controlled from where he'd taken cover behind a rusted water tank. They're trying to see how we respond. Inside, Lily had gone rigid with terror at the sound of gunfire, and Diane wrapped both arms around her, shielding the girl's body with her own, despite the concrete walls providing reasonable protection from anything short of a direct assault. That's them, Lily whispered, voice shaking uncontrollably. That's really them. They're actually here. You're safe in here, Diane said, though her own pulse hammered against her ribs. These walls are solid. Nothing's getting through. Outside, Jack made a rapid decision, keying his radio with steady hands despite the adrenaline flooding his system. Rachel, they just fired a warning shot. We're taking this seriously now. I need that tactical team faster than 35 minutes. Pushing everything we've got. Kim's voice crackled back, urgency evident even through radio static. ETA. Now 28 minutes. Jack, if they escalate further, you have my authorization to use whatever force necessary to protect civilian life. I'll handle the paperwork. Jack peered around the edge of the water tank, tracking the two distant figures through careful observation. They hadn't advanced further, apparently content to hold their position and wait, perhaps recognizing that a full assault against 27 armed bikers carried risks even trained contractors weren't willing to accept without reinforcement. They're waiting for something, Jack muttered to Frankie, who had taken position beside him behind a low concrete barrier. Or someone. As if summoned by the thought, Marcus's voice cut through the tension with new alarm. Jack, I've got another vehicle inbound. Same direction as before. It's the black pickup. The realization crystallized instantly in Jack's mind. Derek Holloway himself was returning, likely with reinforcements, likely recognizing that his entire operation now hinged on eliminating the one witness capable of destroying everything he'd built. How many in the truck? Jack called out. Marcus zoomed the drone's camera on the approaching vehicle. Looks like 3, maybe 4. Hard to tell with the tinted windows. That brings their total to 5 or 6 against our 27, Frankie calculated grimly. Still not great odds for them unless they're planning something we haven't accounted for yet. Inside, Lily's breathing had become ragged with panic, and Diane found herself fighting to project calm she didn't entirely feel. Talk to me, Diane said urgently. Keep talking. What else do you know? Any detail might matter. Lily forced herself to focus, drawing on some reserve of strength that had carried her through 14 months of impossible circumstances. The development, she said suddenly, eyes widening as a piece of memory clicked into place. I remember now. I heard Derek on the phone again maybe 4 days ago. He mentioned a name. Blackwater Ridge Resort and Casino. Diane's eyes widened. A casino out here. That's what I heard, Lily confirmed. He said something about the governor's office fast-tracking the gaming license once the land acquisition was finalized, once Canyon Road was, his words, cleared for development traffic. The implications hit Diane like a physical blow. This isn't just local corruption, she said slowly. If a casino development is involved, if state-level gaming licenses are being fast-tracked, this could reach all the way up to... The sentence was cut short by a fresh burst of gunfire outside, more sustained this time, and the sound of return fire from several of the bikers who had reluctantly engaged after the black pickup's occupants began advancing with clear, hostile intent. They're pushing forward, Frankie shouted, voice tight with controlled urgency as he returned fire toward the advancing threat, careful to aim for cover and disable rather than kill, mindful of Jack's earlier orders, even in the chaos of active engagement. Jack's mind raced through tactical options, acutely aware that every passing second brought both federal reinforcement and potential catastrophe closer in equal measure. Marcus' status on that tactical team. 18 minutes, Marcus called back, hands shaking slightly as he tried to maintain the drone's surveillance feed while gunfire echoed around him. We can hold 18 minutes, Jack said, though the confidence in his voice cost him considerable effort to maintain. Everyone stay disciplined, stay in cover, defensive fire only. Inside the ranger station, each gunshot sent fresh waves of terror through Lily's exhausted body, and Diane found herself holding the girl tighter, murmuring reassurances she desperately hoped would prove true. I'm going to die, Lily whispered, tears streaming down her face. After everything, I'm still going to die out here. No, Diane said, fiercely gripping Lily's shoulders and forcing eye contact despite the chaos outside. Listen to me. You did not run 2 miles on broken glass to save 27 strangers just to die in this building. Do you understand me? We are not letting that happen. Outside, the exchange of gunfire had settled into a tense standoff, both sides apparently reluctant to fully commit to an escalation that could prove catastrophic for everyone involved. Jack used the temporary lull to reassess the situation, peering carefully around his cover to track the positions of both the original 2 riflemen and the newly arrived reinforcements from the pickup truck. Frankie, how are we looking? Jack called out. Nobody's hit on our side, Frankie reported, relief evident in his voice despite the ongoing tension. They're keeping their distance, probably didn't expect this much resistance. A sudden transmission crackled through Jack's radio, and Agent Kim's voice carried fresh urgency. Jack listened carefully. We just intercepted radio traffic between what we believe is your hostile force and someone identified only by the call sign, Ridge. They mentioned reinforcements incoming ETA 15 minutes. I need you to hold position, but understand that if this escalates before my team arrives, things could get significantly worse before they get better. Jack processed this information with grim calculation. 15 minutes for enemy reinforcements, 18 minutes for federal backup. A 3-minute window where everything could go catastrophically wrong. Copy that, Jack said, voice tight. We'll hold. Inside, Lily had begun shaking uncontrollably, the accumulated weight of 14 months of suffering, combined with the immediate terror of active gunfire, finally overwhelming her fragile reserves of strength. I need you to hear something, Diane said urgently, cupping Lily's face in both hands, forcing the girl's panicked eyes to meet her own. What you did today, running into that highway, warning strangers who had every reason to ignore you, that took more courage than most people find in an entire lifetime. Whatever happens in the next few minutes, that courage already changed everything. You already saved 27 lives. Nobody can take that away from you. Something in Lily's expression shifted terror, giving way, however briefly, to something steadier. Something that looked almost like resolve. Grandma Ruth used to say something, Lily whispered. She said the measure of a person isn't whether they're scared. Everybody's scared sometimes. The measure is what they do anyway. Your grandmother sounds like she was a remarkable woman, Diane said softly. She was, Lily said it, and for the first time since the chaos began, something like determination replaced the pure terror in her voice. She'd be so disappointed if I gave up now, after everything. Outside, the tactical situation had reached a critical juncture. The hostile forces, apparently receiving updated orders through their own communications, began repositioning, spreading out in a pattern that suggested preparation for a more coordinated assault rather than continued standoff. They're regrouping, Jack observed grimly, watching through careful surveillance. Marcus, what's our exact timeline now? 14 minutes on federal backup, Marcus reported, voice tight with stress. But Jack, that vehicle I mentioned the reinforcements Agent Kim warned about, I'm picking up a second vehicle now, on thermal, approaching from the southeast. Different direction than the highway. How many minutes? Jack demanded. 8, Marcus said grimly. Maybe less. The mathematics of the situation crystallized with brutal clarity. Enemy reinforcements would arrive a full 6 minutes before federal backup, creating a window of extreme vulnerability that could prove decisive in either direction. We need a contingency, Jack said, mind racing through tactical options. Frankie, what's our fallback position if this location becomes untenable? There's a rock formation about 200 yards north, Frankie said, having clearly already considered this possibility. Better natural cover, harder approach angles. But moving Lily that distance under potential fire is its own kind of risk. Jack weighed the options with the calculated precision that had once determined life and death decisions in far more hostile environments than a rural Arizona desert. We hold here unless directly overrun, he decided. The concrete construction gives us better protection than open rock formation, even if the approach angles aren't ideal. Inside, Diane had returned her attention to Lily, recognizing that maintaining the girl's psychological stability might prove as important as any tactical decision being made outside. "Tell me more," Diane said gently, "about your grandmother, about before all this happened." Lily's expression softened slightly, despite the surrounding chaos memory providing brief refuge from present terror. "She taught me to read before I even started school," Lily said. "We used to go to the library every single Saturday, no matter what. She'd let me pick out 5 books, and we'd sit on this bench outside, and she'd read the first chapter of whatever I chose out loud, doing all the voices, even when people walked by and stared like we were being ridiculous." "That sounds beautiful," Diane said, genuinely moved despite the tension crackling through the building. "She wanted me to go to college," Lily continued, voice thick with grief. "She used to say I was going to be somebody important someday, a lawyer maybe, or a teacher. She kept a bond on top of the refrigerator, put spare change in it every week, called it my college fund, even though we both knew it would never add up to enough to matter." Outside, the tactical situation reached its critical inflection point as Marcus's urgent voice cut through the tension. "Jack, reinforcement vehicle visual confirmed 300 yards and closing fast." "Everyone hold position," Jack shouted, voice carrying absolute authority despite the mounting danger. "Discipline, we hold until federal backup arrives." The newly arrived vehicle, a dark SUV moving with aggressive speed across the rough desert terrain, screeched to a halt near the original black pickup, and 4 additional armed figures emerged quickly, moving to reinforce the existing hostile positions. "That's 7, maybe 8, against our 27. Frankie calculated, though the numerical advantage felt increasingly precarious given the professional training evident in the enemy's coordinated movements. Inside, gunfire erupted with renewed intensity as the reinforced hostile force began a more aggressive advance, testing the perimeter's defenses with a calculated pressure designed to identify weak points before committing to full assault. "Down, stay down," Diane commanded, pressing Lily flat against the concrete floor as debris and dust rained down from bullets striking the building's exterior walls. "We're gonna die in here," Lily whispered, panic threatening to overwhelm the fragile courage she'd been building throughout their conversation. "No," Diane said fiercely, though her own heart hammered with genuine fear. "We are not. Do you hear me? Federal agents are minutes away. We just need to hold on." Outside, Jack's carefully controlled defensive line began showing strain under the coordinated pressure of professional attackers, and for the first time since the confrontation began, genuine doubt crept into his tactical calculations. "Jack," Marcus's voice carried fresh urgency. "Federal teams 6 minutes out. They're pushing everything they've got." "We need 6 minutes," Jack said through gritted teeth, returning fire toward a hostile position that had gotten dangerously close to the perimeter's edge. "Everybody hold 6 minutes." The battle that followed tested every ounce of discipline and courage the assembled bikers possessed, professional training clashing against fierce protective instinct, as the 27 ordinary people found themselves engaged in something far more dangerous than any memorial ride could have prepared them for. Inside the ranger station, as gunfire continued echoing outside and dust rained from the ceiling, with each nearby impact, Lily Carter gripped Diane's hand with white-knuckled intensity, drawing strength from a stranger's presence, as the 6 most dangerous minutes of her already devastating 14 months stretched toward an uncertain resolution. The fate of everyone gathered there hanging in the balance between federal salvation and criminal catastrophe, each passing second bringing them closer to an ending that remained for now entirely unwritten. The 6 minutes stretched into something that felt closer to an hour, each second measured in gunfire and dust, in the ragged sound of Lily's breathing against Diane's shoulder. "Left flank's getting pushed." Frankie's voice cracked through the chaos, and Jack pivoted, low weapon steady, watching 2 of the reinforced hostiles attempt to flank around the water tank toward the ranger station's northern wall. "Marcus, cover Frankie's position," Jack shouted, already moving, boots kicking up gravel, as he closed the distance to intercept the flanking maneuver before it could develop into something catastrophic. A bullet chewed into the concrete inches from Jack's shoulder, close enough that he felt the spray of shattered stone sting his cheek. He didn't flinch. 22 years of training had burned that reflex out of him a long time ago. "Jack, you good?" Diane's voice, muffled from inside, carried genuine terror, despite her attempt to keep it steady for Lily's sake. "I'm good," Jack called back, though the graze along his jaw told a slightly different story. "Stay down, keep her covered." Inside, Lily flinched at every impact, every crack of gunfire, her whole body curled protectively around the knowledge she carried. The knowledge that had made her a target in the first place. "This is my fault," she whispered. "All of this. If I hadn't run out onto that highway—" "Stop," Diane said sharply, gripping the girl's shoulders. "If you hadn't run onto that highway, 27 people would already be dead, and you'd be dead too, just later and quieter, and nobody would have ever known why. You didn't cause this. The men shooting at us caused this. Derek Holloway caused this. Don't you dare carry that weight." Outside, the tactical math had shifted dangerously. Marcus's voice, tight with barely controlled panic, cut through the radio chatter. "Oh, Jack, they're pushing a third position southeast corner. They're trying to surround us. Everybody consolidate toward the front entrance," Jack ordered, recognizing the encirclement attempt for exactly what it was. "Tighten the perimeter, don't give them gaps to exploit." The bikers, most of whom had never faced live combat in their lives, executed the maneuver with more discipline than Jack had any right to expect, years of riding formation translating unexpectedly well into defensive tactics under fire. "Federal team, 4 minutes, Marcus called out, voice cracking with the strain of trying to manage the drone, feed the radio, and his own mounting terror simultaneously. 4 minutes. It might as well have been 4 hours, given the intensity building outside the ranger station's thin concrete walls. A new voice crackled across the radio frequency, one Jack didn't recognize, cold and confident in a way that made his skin crawl. "Callahan," the voice used his name with unsettling familiarity. "This doesn't need to end badly for your whole club. Give us the girl and everyone else walks away clean." Jack's jaw tightened. Somehow they'd gotten onto the club's radio frequency, which meant this operation had resources far beyond what a simple criminal enterprise should possess. "That's not happening," Jack said into the radio voice, hard as stone. "You want her? You go through all 27 of us first." A short, humorless laugh crackled back. "Admirable. Stupid, but admirable. You understand you're protecting a homeless nobody who means less than nothing to you against people who will make sure your entire club disappears from every database in this state." "She's not a nobody," Jack shot back. "She's the reason 27 of us are still breathing right now instead of buried under a rock slide on Canyon Road. That makes her family, and we don't hand over family." Inside, Lily had heard every word through the boarded window, and something in her chest cracked open at the phrase family spoken with such absolute conviction by a man she'd known for barely an hour. "He called me family," she whispered to Diane, tears cutting fresh tracks through the dust on her face. "Because that's exactly what you are now," Diane said, "whether you're ready to believe it or not." The radio crackled again, and this time the voice had shifted, losing its cold confidence, replaced by something sharper, more urgent. "Fall back! Fall back now! We've got incoming aircraft!" Jack's head snapped up as the unmistakable, thundering rhythm of helicopter blades cut through the desert air, growing louder by the second. And within moments, a black tactical helicopter crested the ridgeline, federal markings visible even from a distance. "That's them!" Marcus shouted, relief flooding his voice. "That's Kim's team." The hostile forces, recognizing the sudden and dramatic shift in tactical advantage, began a chaotic retreat, abandoning covered positions in favor of scrambling back toward their vehicles. As the helicopter descended with terrifying speed, federal agents already visible in the open doorway, weapons trained on the fleeing criminals below. "FBI, drop your weapons. Get on the ground now." The amplified command boomed across the desert landscape, and within seconds, ground vehicles Jack hadn't even noticed approaching burst from concealment along the highway, black SUVs converging on the scene with practiced precision. The remaining hostiles, recognizing the overwhelming force now surrounding them, made the calculated decision to surrender rather than face a firefight they couldn't possibly win. Weapons clattered to the ground. Hands rose in defeat. Jack lowered his own weapons slowly, watching federal agents swarm the position with disciplined efficiency. And for the first time since Lily had sprinted into the highway hours earlier, he allowed himself a single shuddering breath of relief. "It's over," he said, though something in his gut told him this was only the beginning. Agent Rachel Kim emerged from one of the SUVs, tactical vest still strapped tight, eyes scanning the scene with the sharp assessment of someone who'd walked into countless chaotic situations and learned to process them instantly. Jack Callahan, she said, striding toward him. You've got a real talent for finding trouble. Trouble found us, Jack said, allowing himself a tired half smile despite the graze still stinging along his jaw. Good timing, Rachel. Where's the girl? Kim asked it, already moving toward the ranger station. Inside, Diane had helped Lily to her feet the moment the gunfire stopped both of them shaking with the particular exhaustion that came after adrenaline finally released its grip. It's over, Diane said softly, guiding Lily toward the doorway. You did it. You're safe. Lily emerged into the harsh afternoon sunlight, blinking against the brightness, her bandaged feet unsteady on the rough ground, and found herself facing a woman in a tactical vest whose expression carried an unexpected softness despite the chaos surrounding them. You're Lily Carter, Agent Kim said, not a question. Yes, ma'am, Lily managed, voice still shaky. You just uncovered what might be one of the largest corruption networks in this state's history, Kim said, and something in her tone carried genuine respect rather than the dismissive skepticism Lily had grown accustomed to over 14 months of being ignored. I need you to be strong for a little while longer. Can you do that? Lily looked around at the scene surrounding her federal agents processing handcuffed suspects, 27 Hells Angels standing in exhausted, watchful formation, the desert stretching endlessly in every direction toward the canyon that had almost become a mass grave. Yes, Lily said, finding a reserve of strength she hadn't known remained inside her. I can do that. As federal agents began loading the captured suspects into transport vehicles, one detail caught Agent Kim's attention with immediate sharpening focus. Where's Derek Holloway? She demanded, scanning the handcuffed prisoners. The leader. He's not here. Jack's stomach dropped as he realized the truth. He was in the black pickup, Jack said, but that truck peeled off before the second wave of reinforcements arrived. He's not in custody. Kim's expression hardened. That's a problem. If Holloway's still out there and he knows this operation collapsed, he's going to start burning evidence and calling in favors from whoever's protecting him. The sheriff, Lily said suddenly, remembering the detail that had felt too dangerous to voice fully until this exact moment. Sheriff Boone, I saw him meet with Derek twice. Kim's radio crackled immediately, and she turned away, issuing rapid instructions to someone on the other end regarding immediate surveillance on Sheriff Wade Boone's location and communications. You're certain it was the sheriff? Kim asked, turning back to Lily with focused intensity. I saw his face, Lily confirmed. I saw the patrol car. I heard him say they needed to keep this operation clean because the county couldn't afford another investigation. He said not after last time. Kim's jaw tightened. Last time, she repeated slowly, that confirms something we've suspected for months. There's an unsolved case from 18 months ago, a rancher named Elias Whitfield who died in what was ruled an accidental fall on his own property. His land bordered Canyon Road. You think he was murdered? Jack said, understanding dawning with grim clarity, because he wouldn't sell his land. I think, Kim said carefully, that we're looking at something significantly larger than one corrupt sheriff in a demolition crew. Land acquisition gaming licenses, a governor's office, allegedly involved in fast-tracking permits. This has the shape of a conspiracy that reaches well beyond this county. As if summoned by the conversation, one of the federal agents processing evidence near the abandoned ranger station called out urgently, Agent Kim, you need to see this. Kim moved quickly toward the agent, who held up a tablet displaying documents recovered from one of the captured suspects' vehicles. Jack and Diane followed, with Lily trailing cautiously behind, curiosity overcoming exhaustion. Financial records, the agent reported. Wire transfers, property deeds, correspondence. This looks like it goes back at least 2 years. Kim's eyes scanned these documents with rapidly sharpening focus, and Jack watched her expression shift from professional assessment to something closer to genuine alarm. This isn't just Derek Holloway's operation, Kim said slowly, scrolling through financial records that painted a picture far more expansive than anyone had initially suspected. There's a shell company structure here, multiple layers, offshore accounts. Whoever's actually funding this has taken serious precautions to stay hidden. Blackwater Ridge Resort and Casino, Lily said suddenly, the name surfacing from memory with sudden clarity. That's what Derek called it on the phone. He said the governor's office was fast-tracking the gaming license. Kim's head snapped up. Say that again. Blackwater Ridge Resort and Casino, Lily repeated. I heard him say it about 4 days ago. He mentioned the governor's office and something about the license being fast-tracked once the land acquisition was finalized. Kim exchanged a look with the agent beside her that carried the weight of confirmation neither of them had wanted to receive. That name has come up before, Kim said quietly, in a completely unrelated investigation out of the state capitol. Financial irregularities connected to expedited gaming license approvals over the past year. We had no idea it connected to a rural county corruption case until right now. The revelation settled over the group like a physical weight. What had begun as an attempted robbery of a motorcycle club had unraveled into something that potentially reached into the state government itself. This changes the scope of everything, Kim said, already reaching for her phone. I need to get the Phoenix field office read in immediately, and I need protective custody arranged for Mrs. Carter here. If this conspiracy is as large as it's starting to look, she's not just a witness to attempted murder anymore. She's a witness to something that could bring down significant political and financial interests. The weight of that statement seemed to physically press against Lily's already exhausted frame. What does that mean for me? She asked, voice small. Kim's expression softened slightly as she turned to address the girl directly. It means you did something incredibly brave and incredibly important today, Kim said. And it means we're going to make sure you're protected while this investigation moves forward. Nobody is going to hurt you. I promise you that. Jack stepped up closer, placing a steady hand on Lily's shoulder. She's not going anywhere without people she trusts, he said, voice carrying no room for argument. If she needs protective custody, the Hells Angels are part of that protection. We didn't stop watching out for her the second the shooting stopped. Kim studied Jack for a long moment, clearly recognizing the immovable resolve in his expression. I appreciate the sentiment, Mr. Callahan, she said carefully. But protective custody typically involves federal facilities, not motorcycle clubs. Then figure out a way to make it work, Jack said. Because that girl ran 2 miles on broken glass to save people who didn't even believe her, and I'm not about to let the system that already failed her once fail her again by shuffling her off somewhere alone with strangers. Something in Jack's fierce protectiveness seemed to reach Kim on a level beyond simple procedure, and she nodded slowly. Let me see what I can arrange, she said. In the meantime, we need to move quickly. If Derek Holloway is still free, and if Sheriff Boone gets word that this operation collapsed, evidence destruction becomes a very real concern. As if the universe had been waiting for exactly that statement, Kim's phone rang with sharp urgency. She answered immediately, listening with an expression that grew increasingly grim as the call progressed. Understood, she said, finally ending the call and turning back to the group, with news that clearly cost her considerable effort to deliver calmly. Sheriff Boone's office confirms he left for the day approximately 40 minutes ago. Nobody's heard from him since. His patrol vehicle's GPS shows it's currently stationary at a private residence outside the county seat. He's running, Jack said flatly. Or destroying evidence, Kim added grimly. I've got agents moving to that location now, but I need everyone here to understand this situation is far from resolved. We've disrupted an attempted mass murder, but the conspiracy behind it remains largely intact. Lily, despite her exhaustion, straightened with sudden resolve. There's something else, she said. Something I haven't told anyone yet because I wasn't sure it mattered. Every eye turned toward her, and Lily felt the familiar flutter of anxiety that came from being the center of attention, the fear that she wouldn't be believed, but she pushed through it, drawing on the same courage that had carried her onto the highway hours earlier. About a week ago, Lily said, I found something. In the drainage ditch near where they'd been working, a phone. Not mine, I don't have one, obviously. I think one of the workers dropped it during setup. I've been keeping it hidden because I didn't know what to do with it, and I was scared that if anyone found it on me, they'd know I'd been watching them. Kim's entire posture shifted, sharpening with sudden, intense focus. You have a phone belonging to someone involved in this operation. It's dead? Lily said quickly. I couldn't charge it. I don't even know if it still works. But I kept it because, I don't know, it felt like evidence. It felt like something that might matter someday. Where is it now? Kim asked, barely containing her urgency. Hidden, Lily said, under the railroad trestle bridge, in a space between 2 support beams, where I used to keep things safe. My backpack's there too, with everything else I own. Kim turned immediately to one of her agents. I need a team to escort Ms. Carter to that location right now, secure whatever's there as evidence, chain of custody protocols in full effect. As the logistics of retrieving the hidden phone began coalescing into action, Jack found himself standing beside Lily, watching the scale of what her simple act of courage had unleashed continue expanding with each passing minute. "You kept evidence this whole time?" Jack said, something like awe creeping into his voice. "Even while you were homeless, even while nobody believed you about anything, you kept collecting proof." "I didn't know what else to do," Lily admitted. "I couldn't go to the police, not after I saw the sheriff shake Derek's hand. I couldn't tell anyone in town because who would believe a homeless girl over the county sheriff? So I just kept watching, kept remembering everything I could. It felt like the only thing I actually had control over." Diane, who had remained close throughout the unfolding revelations, felt something twist painfully in her chest at the girl's words. 14 months of isolation, and this teenager had spent that time methodically documenting a criminal conspiracy because nobody had given her any other option. "That's not just survival," Diane said quietly. "That's investigative instinct most trained professionals would envy." As federal agents organized transportation to retrieve the hidden phone, Agent Kim pulled Jack aside, her expression carrying the weight of decisions that extended far beyond the immediate crisis. "I need to ask you something directly," Kim said. "This is going to get significantly more dangerous before it gets safer. If Sheriff Boone is destroying evidence right now, and if this conspiracy really does connect to state-level corruption, there are going to be powerful people with strong motivation to make sure Lily Carter never testifies to anything." "I understand," Jack said. "Do you?" Kim pressed. "Because your club just engaged in an armed confrontation with what appears to be private security contractors possibly connected to state political interests. This is not going to stay contained to a quiet federal investigation. This is going to attract media attention, political pressure, and potentially significant danger to everyone involved, including your entire membership." Jack considered her words carefully, watching Lily across the scene, still shaking slightly but standing taller than she had when she'd first collapsed onto the scorching asphalt hours earlier. "Rachel," Jack said finally, "I spent 22 years believing in something bigger than myself. I believed in protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. I believed in that oath even when it cost me things I never got back. That girl ran onto a highway to save 27 strangers who mostly laughed at her when she started talking. If protecting her means facing down whatever powerful people are behind this, then that's exactly what we're going to do." Kim studied him for a long moment, something shifting in her professional demeanor toward genuine respect. "All right," she said finally, "then let's make sure we do this right." As the sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the desert landscape, the scene at the ranger station transformed from active crisis into methodical federal investigation. Evidence teams processed the confrontation site, handcuffed suspects were loaded into transport vehicles for processing, and Lily Carter, still wrapped in a borrowed jacket from one of the female agents, found herself surrounded by an unlikely coalition of federal law enforcement and motorcycle club members, all suddenly invested in her survival and the success of an investigation that had begun with nothing more than her desperate sprint into oncoming traffic. "What happens now?" Lily asked, exhaustion finally beginning to overtake the adrenaline that had carried her through the day's chaos. "Now," Kim said, "we get you somewhere safe, we retrieve that phone, and we start building a case that's going to hold every single person involved in this accountable, including whoever's funding it from the shadows." As agents began organizing the convoy that would transport Lily toward the railroad trestle bridge to retrieve the crucial evidence she'd hidden away, a call came through Kim's radio that shifted the entire trajectory of the investigation once again. "Agent Kim, we have a situation at the Boone residence," the voice crackled with urgent tension. "Sheriff Boone is not cooperating. Repeat, subject is not cooperating, and we're seeing indications he's attempting to destroy digital evidence right now." Kim's expression hardened into something dangerous. "Move in," she ordered without hesitation. "Full search authorization, secure all electronic devices immediately." Jack watched the federal agent's controlled urgency and understood instinctively that the investigation had reached a critical inflection point, one where the next several hours would determine whether Sheriff Boone's corruption could be proven definitively or whether crucial evidence would be lost forever to hastily deleted files and shredded documents. "We need that phone," Kim said, turning back to the group with renewed intensity. "Whatever's on it might be the difference between an airtight case and one that falls apart in court." Lily, despite her bone-deep exhaustion, straightened with determination. "Then let's go get it," she said. "I know exactly where it is." As the convoy prepared to move toward the railroad trestle bridge that had served as Lily's shelter for 14 desperate months, Jack found himself riding alongside the federal vehicle, unwilling to let the girl who had saved his entire club face this next chapter without familiar faces beside her. The bridge appeared through the gathering dusk exactly as Lily had described, a rusted iron structure spanning a dry wash, its shadow offering the only shelter for miles in the flat desert terrain. Lily directed the agents toward a specific support beam, her hands trembling as she pointed toward the narrow gap where she'd hidden her few possessions and the crucial evidence that might unravel an entire conspiracy. There, she said, between those two beams wrapped in a plastic bag to keep the dust out. An agent carefully extracted a weathered backpack along with a separate wrap bundle, and as the phone was revealed still coated in protective plastic, Kim's expression carried the particular satisfaction of someone watching a case transform from circumstantial to potentially devastating. Get this to the digital forensics team immediately, Kim instructed. Priority processing. As the evidence was secured and transported, Lily stood beside the bridge that had sheltered her through countless desperate nights, watching federal agents document what had essentially been her home for over a year, and something complicated moved across her exhausted features. "This is where I lived," she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. "For 14 months. This was my whole world." Diane moved to stand beside her, understanding the weight of what the girl was processing. "Not anymore," Diane said softly. "That chapter's closing tonight, whether you're ready for it or not." As darkness began settling over the desert landscape, Agent Kim received another urgent update, and this time the news carried the particular electricity of a case breaking wide open. "Agent Kim," the voice crackled through her radio. "We've recovered substantial digital evidence from Sheriff Boone's residence before he could complete deletion. Financial records, communications with Holloway, and Agent Kim. There's correspondence here referencing someone identified only as the governor's office contact. This goes exactly where we suspected." Kim closed her eyes briefly, absorbing the magnitude of what they'd just uncovered. When she opened them again, her expression carried the focused determination of someone who understood they had stumbled onto something that would reshape careers, expose corruption at levels few had dared suspect, and potentially bring long overdue justice to a county that had spent years under the shadow of protected criminal enterprise. "This is bigger than we initially understood," Kim said, turning to address Jack, Diane, and Lily with grave seriousness. "Much bigger, and it means the danger surrounding Lily just increased significantly because there are now powerful people with very serious motivation to make sure she never testifies to anything she witnessed." Jack's jaw tightened with renewed resolve. "Then we make sure she's protected every single hour of every single day until this case is closed," he said, "whatever that takes." As the investigation's true scope began crystallizing into terrifying clarity, and as federal agents worked through the night processing evidence that would eventually expose corruption, reaching from a small county sheriff's office all the way toward the state capitol itself, Carter found herself standing at the center of a conspiracy far larger than anything she could have imagined when she'd first witnessed three men planting explosives on a lonely desert road. What had begun as a desperate act of conscience had unraveled into a case that would ultimately determine not just her own survival, but the fate of every person who had ever been silenced, ignored, or eliminated to protect powerful interests hiding behind badges, government offices, and casino development deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The night stretched long over the desert as digital forensics teams worked through Sheriff Boone's confiscated devices, and by the time the first gray light of dawn crept across the horizon, Agent Kim had already fielded 3 separate calls from the Phoenix field office, each one carrying more urgency than the last. Jack hadn't slept, neither had Diane. They'd stationed themselves at the federal safe house outside Flagstaff, where Lily had been relocated overnight, a modest 2-story building with reinforced windows and 2 agents posted at every entrance. And neither of them had been willing to leave the girl alone with strangers, no matter how official their credentials looked. "You should rest," Diane said quietly, watching Jack pace the small kitchen for what had to be the 20th time since midnight. "Can't," Jack admitted. "Not until I know she's actually safe. Not temporarily safe, actually safe." Down the hallway, Lily lay awake on an unfamiliar bed, staring at a ceiling that wasn't railroad trestle iron. in a room that had real walls and real air conditioning, and found herself unable to process the sudden absence of danger after 14 months of constant vigilance. A soft knock came at her door. "Lily, it's Diane. Can I come in?" "Yeah," Lily said, sitting up. Diane entered, carrying 2 mugs of coffee, setting one on the nightstand before settling into the room's single chair. "Couldn't sleep either." "I keep waiting for something to go wrong," Lily admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I hear gunshots." "That's normal," Diane said gently. "That's your body processing what happened. It doesn't mean anything's actually wrong right now." Before Lily could respond, Agent Kim's voice carried up the stairwell, sharp with barely contained urgency. "Everyone downstairs now. We have developments." Jack was already moving before Kim finished the sentence, and by the time Lily and Diane reached the small living room, serving as a makeshift command center, 3 additional agents had arrived, laptops open, faces grim with the particular intensity of people who'd uncovered something significant. "Talk to me," Jack said, reading the tension in the room instantly. Kim turned her laptop screen toward the group, displaying a financial document dense with wire transfer records and shell company names. "The phone Lily recovered," Kim said. "It wasn't dead after all. Our digital forensics team managed to extract data from the internal storage even without power. What we found connects Derek Holloway's operation directly to a private equity fund based in Scottsdale called Meridian Capital Partners." "Never heard of them," Jack said. "Most people haven't," Kim replied, "because Meridian Capital Partners exists almost entirely on paper. Layers of shell companies, offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, ownership structures, deliberately designed to obscure who actually controls the money. But we traced it back through 6 different holding companies to a single individual." She paused, and the weight of what she was about to say pressed visibly against her professional composure. "Senator Whitmore Hayes," Kim said finally, "chairman of the State Gaming Commission's Oversight Subcommittee." The name landed like a physical blow across the room. Even Jack, who'd spent the last 18 hours absorbing escalating revelations about the scope of this conspiracy, felt something cold settle in his stomach. "A sitting state senator is behind this," he said slowly. "We believe so," Kim confirmed. "Senator Hayes has been quietly acquiring land options along Canyon Road through Meridian Capital for the past 2 years, positioning himself to personally profit from the Blackwater Ridge Resort and casino development, while simultaneously chairing the very committee responsible for approving its gaming license." Lily, standing in the doorway with her coffee mug forgotten in her hands, felt the ground shift beneath everything she thought she understood about the danger she'd stumbled into. "A senator wanted me dead," she said quietly. "A senator wanted anyone dead who threatened his investment," Kim corrected gently. "Sheriff Boone was his local enforcement. Derek Holloway was his operational muscle. You just happened to be the one person who saw enough to connect all of it together. This changes everything about her security situation," Jack said, voice hardening. "If a state senator is involved, we're not just talking about local criminals anymore. We're talking about someone with real institutional power, real resources, real reach." Kim nodded grimly. "Which is exactly why I need to tell you what's happening next. We're moving Lily to a federal witness protection facility in Denver, effective immediately. Full security detail, new identity documentation in process, complete isolation from anyone connected to this investigation until we can guarantee her safety." The words hit Lily like a physical blow. "Wait," she said, panic flooding back into her voice. "Isolation. What does that mean? I can't see any of you again." "It means protecting you, but requires minimizing exposure," Kim said, though something in her expression suggested she understood exactly how devastating this news would land. "It's standard protocol for witnesses in cases of this magnitude." Jack stepped forward immediately, his expression carrying the same immovable resolve he'd shown since the moment Lily had first sprinted onto that highway. "Absolutely not," he said. "She just spent 14 months completely alone, Rachel. Completely isolated with nobody checking on her, nobody caring whether she survived another night. You are not going to solve her safety problem by recreating the exact isolation that nearly destroyed her." "Jack, I understand your concern, but protocol exists for a reason." "Protocol didn't run onto that highway," Jack cut in, voice rising with barely controlled fury. "Protocol didn't warn 27 strangers about explosives and rifles. Protocol didn't keep evidence hidden under a railroad bridge for weeks because it might matter someday. This girl has more courage and more integrity than most protocols were ever designed to protect, And I am not letting the system fail her the exact same way this county already failed her once. The room fell silent tension crackling between Jack's protective fury and Kim's professional obligations. "What are you proposing?" Kim asked, finally, something in her tone suggesting she was genuinely open to alternatives despite institutional pressure to follow standard procedure. "Let us stay connected," Jack said. "Not compromise her location, not compromise the case, but find a way that doesn't leave her completely alone again. She's already lost her grandmother, her home, everything familiar. Don't take away the first people who actually showed up for her too." Diane moved to stand beside Jack, adding her own voice to the argument. "There's precedent for this," Diane said. "Witness protection programs have accommodated support networks before when security assessments allow for it. It's not standard, but it's not unprecedented either." Kim studied both of them for a long moment, clearly weighing institutional protocol against the genuine human cost of the decision in front of her. Finally, she turned to Lily directly. "What do you want?" Kim asked, her voice softening into something more personal than professional. "This is ultimately about your safety and your life, Lily. I need to know what actually matters to you." Lily looked between Jack and Diane, the two people who had transformed from strangers into something she was struggling to name, something that felt dangerously close to family after 14 months of believing she'd never have that again. "I don't want to disappear," Lily said, the voice shaking but resolute. "I've been disappearing for over a year. Nobody noticed. Nobody cared. For the first time since Grandma Ruth died, people actually see me. I don't want to trade one kind of invisibility for another, even if this one comes with better security." Kim closed her eyes, briefly processing the weight of the decision now resting on her shoulders. "Let me make some calls," she said finally. "I can't promise anything, but I'll advocate for a modified protection arrangement that allows for supervised contact. That's the best I can offer right now." As Kim stepped away to begin the difficult process of negotiating exceptions to standard protocol, one of the other agents monitoring communications suddenly straightened with fresh urgency. "Agent Kim, you need to see this right now." Kim rushed back to the makeshift command center, and the agent turned his laptop screen toward the group, displaying what appeared to be a breaking news alert. "Senator Hayes just issued a public statement," the agent reported. "Preemptive denial of any wrongdoing, framing this at, quote, baseless accusations from a criminal element attempting to extort political figures. He's already got legal representation lined up, and he's calling for an investigation into who leaked information about a, quote, ongoing law enforcement matter. He's trying to control the narrative before we can build our case," Kim said grimly, "which means he's got someone inside law enforcement feeding him information about our investigation." The revelation sent a fresh wave of tension through the room. If Senator Hayes had inside access to federal investigation details, the danger to Lily hadn't diminished with his exposure. If anything, it had escalated into something more calculated and more dangerous. "We need to move faster than his legal team can maneuver," Kim said, already pulling out her phone to coordinate with the Phoenix field office. "I want everything we have on Meridian Capital Partners, every shell company, every wire transfer, cross-referenced and verified within the next 12 hours. If we're going to bring charges against a sitting state senator, we need an airtight case before he can bury this in procedural delays and political pressure." As the federal team mobilized into intense coordinated action, Jack found himself standing beside Lily, watching the machinery of a major corruption investigation shift into overdrive around them. "This is really happening," Lily said quietly, something between awe and terror in her voice. "I actually brought down a state senator." "You didn't bring him down yet," Jack said honestly, "but you gave federal investigators everything they need to try. That's more than most people ever manage in an entire lifetime." Over the following days, the investigation accelerated with dizzying speed, each new revelation building on the last, as federal prosecutors worked to construct a case sturdy enough to withstand the inevitable political and legal challenges that Senator Hayes' team would mount. Sheriff Wade Boone, facing overwhelming digital evidence recovered from his residence, made the calculated decision to cooperate with federal prosecutors in exchange for reduced charges, and his testimony provided crucial insight into the full scope of the conspiracy that had operated in the shadows of Cottonwood County for nearly 3 years. "He didn't just protect Holloway's operation," Kim explained during a briefing session at the Safe House, laying out the expanding scope of corruption for Jack, Diane, and Lily. Boone's testimony confirms at least 4 other incidents where the sheriff's department deliberately mishandled investigations to protect Senator Hayes' land acquisition interests. The rancher, Jack said slowly, remembering the earlier mention of Elias Whitfield's death 18 months prior, the one who died in the accidental fall. Kim nodded grimly. Boone confirmed it wasn't accidental. Whitfield refused to sell his property to Meridian Capital, and when he threatened to go public with what he knew about the shell company's actual ownership, Derek Holloway's people staged the fall to look natural. Boone falsified the investigation to close the case without proper forensic review. The revelation hit Lily particularly hard, and she found herself gripping the arms of her chair with white-knuckled intensity. "They murdered someone before," she whispered, "and it worked. Nobody caught them. Until you," Diane said gently, placing a reassuring hand on the girl's shoulder. "Until you refused to stay silent." As the investigation continued expanding, drawing increasing media attention, despite federal efforts to control information flow, the story of the homeless teenager who had warned 27 bikers about an assassination plot began attracting national interest, particularly after a local news station obtained partial dashcam footage from one of the responding federal vehicles, showing the chaotic confrontation at the ranger station. "This is spreading faster than we can control," Kim said one evening, scrolling through social media analytics on her tablet with visible frustration. "Someone leaked footage. It's already got several million views, and reporters are starting to piece together enough details to identify Lily by name." "Is that dangerous for her?" Jack asked, immediately protective. "It's complicated," Kim admitted. "On one hand, public attention creates accountability pressure that makes it harder for Senator Hayes' team to quietly bury this investigation through political maneuvering. On the other hand, it also makes Lily a more visible target for anyone still loyal to the conspiracy who might want to silence her before trial. The tension of that dual-edged reality settled over the household like a persistent weight, and Lily found herself increasingly anxious every time her phone, a temporary device provided by federal agents for limited supervised communication, buzzed with news alerts referencing her story. "They're calling me a hero," Lily said one afternoon, staring at her phone screen with an expression that mixed disbelief with something closer to discomfort. "The girl who saved the Hells Angels. That's what one headline says." "How does that feel?" Diane asked, settling beside her on the safe house's small couch. "Weird," Lily admitted. "For 14 months, people looked right through me. Now strangers on the internet are calling me brave, and I don't even recognize the person they're describing." "You are that person," Diane said firmly. "You always were. You just needed the world to finally pay attention." As the days progressed, federal prosecutors worked around the clock, building their case against Senator Hayes, and the pressure of public attention, combined with mounting evidence, began producing exactly the kind of institutional accountability that corruption of this magnitude had managed to avoid for years. Then 9 days after the initial confrontation on Canyon Road, Agent Kim arrived at the safe house with news that shifted the entire trajectory of the investigation once again. "Derek Holloway's been located," Kim announced, gathering everyone into the living room with visible urgency. Border Patrol intercepted him attempting to cross into Mexico near Nogales using falsified documentation. He's in federal custody now, and given the overwhelming evidence against him, his legal team has already initiated cooperation negotiations. "He's going to testify against Hayes," Jack said, understanding immediately what this development meant. "That's exactly what we're hoping," Kim confirmed. "If Holloway provides direct testimony connecting Senator Hayes to the ordered assassination attempt on Canyon Road, combined with the financial evidence we've already assembled, we potentially have enough for federal racketeering and conspiracy charges that could put Hayes away for the rest of his life." The news sent a wave of cautious hope through the room, though Lily's expression remained guarded, years of disappointment having taught her not to celebrate victories before they were fully secured. "What happens to me if he testifies?" Lily asked. "Do I still have to testify too?" Kim's expression grew serious. "Almost certainly," she said honestly. "Your testimony about witnessing the sheriff's meeting with Holloway, about overhearing details of the casino development plans, that establishes crucial context that Holloway's testimony alone can't provide. I won't lie to you, Lily. This is going to require you to face Senator Hayes in court, potentially multiple times through pretrial hearings and the eventual trial itself. The prospect of facing a powerful state senator, of standing in a courtroom while lawyers with unlimited resources attempted to discredit her testimony, sent visible anxiety rippling through Lily's exhausted frame. "I don't know if I can do that," she admitted quietly. I'm just, I'm nobody. I'm a homeless kid with no education, no credibility. His lawyers are going to tear me apart. Jack moved to kneel in front of her chair, forcing gentle eye contact despite her attempt to look away. Listen to me, he said, voice carrying the same steady conviction that had first made Lily believe someone might actually listen to her warning on that highway. You are not nobody. You survived 14 months of a system that completely failed you, and you still found the courage to save 27 strangers' lives. You documented a criminal conspiracy with nothing but your own memory and instincts, and it was solid enough that federal prosecutors are building a case around it. If any lawyer thinks they're going to tear apart someone with that kind of resilience, they're vastly underestimating exactly who they're dealing with. Something in Lily's expression shifted the familiar fear, giving way gradually to something steadier. You really believe that, she said, not quite a question. I know that, Jack corrected. I've served with Marines who broke under far less pressure than what you've already survived. You have more strength in you than you've given yourself credit for, and when the time comes, this entire club is going to be standing behind you in that courtroom. As if to punctuate his statement, Diane spoke up from across the room. All 27 of us, she confirmed. We already talked about it. Whatever hearings, whatever trial dates were going to be there, every single time. The weight of that promise seemed to settle something deep within Lily's exhausted spirit, and for the first time since the entire ordeal began, she allowed herself to imagine a future that extended beyond simple survival. Over the following weeks, as federal prosecutors continued building their case with methodical precision, Lily found herself gradually adjusting to a life that felt almost unrecognizable compared to the desperate isolation she'd endured under the railroad trestle bridge. The modified witness protection arrangement Kim had successfully negotiated allowed for regular supervised visits from Jack, Diane, and occasionally other members of the Hells Angels, creating an unconventional but genuine support network that federal security protocols had never quite anticipated needing to accommodate. I got you something, Diane announced during one visit, presenting Lily with a small package that turned out to contain a modest collection of books, carefully selected paperbacks, ranging from classic literature to contemporary fiction. You didn't have to do that, Lily said, though her fingers traced the covers with obvious longing. I know, Diane said simply. I wanted to. You mentioned your grandmother used to take you to the library every Saturday. I figured you might miss having books around. The gesture, small as it was, cracked something open in Lily's carefully maintained composure, and she found herself crying not from fear or trauma this time, but from something closer to overwhelming gratitude. Nobody's done something like this for me in so long, she whispered. Just because. Not because they needed something, not because I was useful, just because. That's what family does, Diane said softly, settling beside her. Small things just because. Get used to it. As Lily's relationship with the extended Hells Angels support network deepened, the federal investigation continued its methodical march toward what prosecutors hoped would be a landmark conviction. Derek Holloway's cooperation agreement produced exactly the testimony federal investigators had hoped for: detailed accounts of meetings with Senator Hayes, explicit instructions regarding land acquisition strategies, and crucially, direct confirmation that Hayes had personally authorized the elimination of any witnesses who might threaten the casino development timeline. We have him, Kim announced during a briefing session, nearly 3 weeks after the initial confrontation, her expression carrying the particular satisfaction of a case coming together after months, sometimes years of careful investigation. Holloway's testimony, combined with the financial records, combined with Sheriff Boone's cooperation, combined with Lily's firsthand account of witnessing the corrupt meetings, we have enough for a federal indictment on racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, and public corruption charges. The news landed with the particular weight of vindication that Lily had never quite allowed herself to hope for during 14 months of being dismissed and ignored. He's actually going to face charges, Lily said slowly, as though testing whether the words might dissolve if she said them too quickly. Federal charges, Kim confirmed. Arraignment is scheduled for next week. This is really happening, Lily. Everything you risked, everything you sacrificed to keep watching and remembering what you witnessed, it's about to hold one of the most powerful men in this state accountable for his actions. As the reality of the approaching legal proceedings settled over the household, Jack found himself reflecting on the strange, unpredictable path that had led from a routine memorial ride to standing at the center of a corruption case that would likely dominate state headlines for months to come. You know what strikes me most about all this? Jack said one evening, sitting with Lily on the safe house's back porch as desert stars emerged overhead. 14 months and not one person in that entire town helped you. Not the church, not the school counselor, not the hardware store owner. But the moment you needed help, you ran toward complete strangers on motorcycles. I didn't have a choice, Lily said. I couldn't just watch 27 people ride into a trap. Even if you'd all laughed at me, even if you'd ridden right past me, I had to try. That's exactly my point, Jack said. You had every reason to give up on people. Every single person who was supposed to help you had already failed you. But you still believed strangers might listen. That takes a kind of faith most people lose long before they're 18 years old. Lily considered this for a long moment, staring up at the vast desert sky. Grandma Ruth used to say that giving up on people just because some of them fail you means letting the worst people win, she said quietly. She said you have to keep believing somebody will show up even when plenty of people don't. She sounds like she raised an extraordinary young woman, Jack said. She'd be proud of you, Diane added, having joined them on the porch. Not just for warning us about the ambush, for everything since, for finding the courage to keep going even when everything felt impossible. As the investigation moved steadily towards Senator Hayes' arraignment, media attention around the case continued intensifying, transforming Lily's story from local curiosity into genuine national interest. Major news networks began requesting interviews, though federal protective protocols prevented most direct media contact, and the viral dashcam footage from the initial confrontation had accumulated tens of millions of views across social media platforms, sparking widespread public conversation about homelessness, institutional failure, and the courage of a teenager that so many had initially dismissed. There's something happening back in Cottonwood Flats, Kim mentioned during one update session, scrolling through her tablet with a complicated expression. The town's reacting to everything that's come out about Sheriff Boone's corruption and the failed ambush. Local news is reporting significant public outcry about how the community treated you before all this happened. What kind of outcry? Lily asked, genuinely curious despite her general reluctance to follow news coverage of her own story. Apparently there's a growing movement, Kim said. Residents demanding accountability, not just from Sheriff Boone, but from local institutions that failed to help you during your homelessness. The church that offered only prayers. The school counselor who provided a pamphlet for a shelter that was always full. There's talk of a town council meeting specifically addressing how the community's homeless population gets supported going forward. The news left Lily with complicated emotions. Vindication mixing uncomfortably with lingering resentment toward a community that had watched her suffer for over a year without meaningful intervention. It's easy to care now, Lily said, unable to fully suppress the bitter edge in her voice. Now that I'm useful, now that I helped catch a corrupt senator, where was that concern when I was sleeping under a bridge? Diane didn't try to argue away the legitimate anger in Lily's words. You're allowed to feel that, Diane said instead. Nobody's asking you to forgive a town that failed you just because things worked out eventually. That anger is valid. But Lily asked, sensing there was more Diane wanted to say. But, Diane continued gently, sometimes people need a crisis to recognize failures they'd rather not confront. That doesn't excuse what happened to you. It doesn't make 14 months of suffering acceptable just because it eventually led to accountability. But if that town genuinely changes how it treats vulnerable people going forward, if other homeless teenagers get help they need, instead of pamphlets for shelters that are always full, that matters too, even if it came too late to spare you the worst of what you endured. Lily absorbed this with the particular weariness of someone forced to hold complicated, contradictory truths simultaneously. I don't know how to feel about any of this, she admitted. I'm proud of what I did. I'm terrified about testifying. I'm angry at everyone who ignored me for so long. And somehow, despite everything, I'm actually happy for the first time in longer than I can remember because of you and Jack and everyone else who actually showed up when it mattered. All of those feelings can exist together, Diane said. That's not confusion. That's just being human. As the day of Senator Hayes' arraignment approached, federal security protocols intensified around Lily's location, reflecting the mounting political pressure and the very real possibility that desperate allies of the senator might attempt something drastic to prevent his case from moving forward. Agent Kim's team conducted additional security sweeps, updated protective measures, and prepared Lily as thoroughly as possible for the intense scrutiny that would accompany her eventual testimony. I need you to understand something before we go further, Kim said during one of their preparation sessions, her expression carrying genuine concern beneath professional composure. Senator Hayes has assembled one of the most expensive legal defense teams in the state's history. They are going to attack your credibility relentlessly. They're going to bring up your homelessness, your lack of formal education, potentially even try to paint you as an unreliable witness, motivated by media attention or financial gain. I don't want money, Lily said immediately, something fierce entering her voice. I never wanted anything except for someone to believe me. I know that, Kim said, but defense attorneys don't care about truth in the way you might hope. They care about creating enough doubt to protect their client. You need to be prepared for that reality. Jack, who had insisted on attending every preparation session, despite Kim's initial reluctance, spoke up with quiet intensity. She doesn't face any of that alone, he said. Whatever they throw at her in that courtroom, she's got 27 witnesses to her courage sitting right behind her in a federal case built on evidence that doesn't depend solely on her testimony to succeed. Kim nodded slowly. That's true, she acknowledged. The financial records, Holloway's cooperation, Sheriff Boone's testimony, all of that exists independently of what Lily says on the stand. Her testimony strengthens the case significantly, but it's not the only foundation holding everything together. The reassurance helped, though Lily could feel the weight of the approaching legal battle pressing against her chest with increasing intensity as the arraignment date drew closer. Late one evening, unable to sleep, despite exhaustion that seemed to permeate every part of her being, Lily found herself sitting alone on the safe house porch, staring up at unfamiliar stars in an unfamiliar sky, trying to process the impossible distance she'd traveled from a homeless girl sleeping under a railroad bridge to the central witness in a case that would likely determine the political fate of a sitting state senator. The porch door creaked open behind her, and Jack emerged, settling into the chair beside her without needing an invitation. Can't sleep either, he asked. Too much running through my head, Lily admitted. Everything that's happened, everything that's still coming. You want to know something I learned in the Marines? Jack asked. Sometimes the anticipation of a battle is worse than the battle itself. Your mind builds up every possible catastrophe, every worst-case scenario, until the actual fight feels almost like relief compared to the anxiety of waiting for it. Is that supposed to be comforting? Lily asked, a small, exhausted laugh escaping despite herself. Maybe not comforting, Jack admitted, allowing himself a slight smile. But true, and sometimes true matters more than comforting. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the vast desert night stretching endlessly around them, until Lily finally spoke again, her voice carrying a vulnerability she rarely allowed herself to express. Do you think Grandma Ruth would be proud of me? She asked. Or do you think she'd be scared seeing everything I've gotten myself into? Jack considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. I think, he said slowly, that any grandmother who raised a granddaughter with your kind of courage and integrity would be proud beyond words. And yes, I think she'd probably be scared too. Those two feelings aren't mutually exclusive. Sometimes the people who love us most are exactly the ones who feel both simultaneously. Lily nodded slowly, finding unexpected comfort in the honest complexity of his answer rather than empty reassurance. Thank you, she said quietly, for believing me that day on the highway, for everything since. Thank you, Jack replied, for having the courage to run toward us instead of just watching us ride into danger. You saved 27 lives with nothing but your voice and your willingness to be laughed at. That's not something I'll ever forget, no matter how this legal battle unfolds. As the desert night deepened around them, and as the machinery of federal prosecution continued its methodical preparation for what promised to become one of the most significant public corruption cases in the state's recent history, neither Jack nor Lily could yet know exactly how the coming courtroom battles would unfold, or what final price justice might demand before Senator Hayes and everyone who had enabled his corruption finally faced complete accountability for the conspiracy that had very nearly claimed 27 innocent lives on a lonely stretch of Canyon Road. The morning of Senator Hayes' arraignment arrived with a kind of electric tension that seemed to have settled into every corner of the safe house, and Lily stood in front of the small bedroom mirror, smoothing down a blazer Diane had helped her pick out 3 days earlier, trying to recognize the young woman staring back at her. You look like someone who's about to tell the truth in front of the entire country, Diane said from the doorway, her voice carrying quiet pride. I feel like I'm about to throw up, Lily admitted, That's allowed too, Diane said, crossing the room to straighten the collar of Lily's blazer with gentle maternal precision. Courage isn't the absence of fear. You taught me that actually standing in the middle of that highway. Downstairs, Jack paced the living room in his own dress clothes, a rare departure from his usual leather vest. Though the Hells Angels patch remained pinned discreetly to his jacket's inner lapel, a quiet reminder of exactly who stood behind Lily today. "Convoy's ready," Marcus called from the front window, watching as federal vehicles assembled outside alongside a formation of motorcycles that stretched further than Lily had expected. "Jack, there's more of us here than I thought made the trip." Jack moved to the window, and what he saw brought an unexpected tightness to his throat. Not 27 bikers, not even the extended chapter membership. Nearly 90 motorcycles lined the street outside the federal courthouse in downtown Phoenix. Riders who had traveled from 3 different states after word spread through veteran motorcycle networks about what had happened on Canyon Road. "They came," Jack said quietly. "All of them came." Agent Kim arrived precisely at 8, her expression carrying the focused intensity of someone about to walk into the most significant case of her career. "It's time," she said, though her eyes softened slightly as she looked at Lily. "Are you ready?" "No," Lily admitted honestly, "but I'm going anyway." "That's the only kind of ready that matters," Kim said. The drive to the federal courthouse felt both impossibly long and terrifyingly short, and as their vehicle approached the building, Lily's breath caught at the sight of the crowd that had gathered outside. News vans lined the street, reporters clustered near the entrance, and beyond them the motorcycles' engines, silent now riders, standing in solemn formation, an unmistakable wall of support that parted respectfully as Lily's vehicle approached. "Oh my God," Lily whispered, pressing her hand against the window. "There's so many of them." "Word travels fast in this community," Jack said, unable to keep the emotion from his voice. "When one of us needs backing riders show up, doesn't matter if they've never met you personally. What matters is what you did." As Lily stepped out of the vehicle, flanked by federal agents on either side, the assembled bikers began a slow, rhythmic applause that spread through the crowd like wildfire. Dozens of leather-clad riders honoring a homeless teenager who had become, in the span of a few impossible weeks, a symbol of courage that had captured the nation's imagination. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere carried a different kind of weight, formal and hushed, as Senator Whitmore Hayes sat at the defense table looking considerably less powerful than his public persona had ever suggested. His expensive suit, unable to disguise the tension visible in his jaw, as federal prosecutors laid out the opening framework of a case that had taken down county sheriffs, exposed a murder conspiracy, and now threatened to end his political career entirely. Lily sat in the gallery during the initial arraignment proceedings, watching as the judge read formal charges: conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, public corruption, obstruction of justice. Each charge landed with the particular satisfaction of watching accountability finally arrive for someone who had believed his power made him untouchable. "How does the defendant plead?" the judge asked. "Not guilty, Your Honor." Hayes' attorney responded, though the confidence in his voice sounded considerably more strained than his reputation suggested it should. As proceedings continued, establishing trial dates and pretrial hearing schedules, Lily found herself watching Senator Hayes with an intensity she hadn't expected. This was the man whose orders had nearly gotten 27 strangers killed. This was the man who had authorized her own elimination as a witness. And yet, sitting there in the sterile formality of federal court, he looked smaller than the terror he'd inspired. Less a mastermind, and more simply a man finally facing consequences for believing himself beyond the reach of justice. Over the following months, as pretrial proceedings unfolded with methodical federal precision, Lily's life settled into an unexpected rhythm. The modified witness protection arrangement Kim had fought to secure allowed her to remain connected to Jack, Diane, and the broader Hells Angels community while still maintaining necessary security protocols. And gradually, painfully, beautifully, Lily began rebuilding something that felt dangerously close to an actual life. "I want to show you something," Jack said one afternoon, arriving at the safe house with an expression Lily couldn't quite read. He led her to his truck, and during the drive, refused to explain their destination, despite her repeated questions. When they finally arrived, Lily's breath caught entirely. They stood outside her grandmother's house on Miners Row, the same house that had been foreclosed and abandoned 14 months earlier, except now fresh paint covered the exterior. New windows gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, and the overgrown yard had been transformed into something approaching its former modest beauty. "What is this?" Lily asked, voice barely above a whisper. "The Hells Angels started a fundraiser," Jack explained. "After the story went, national veterans and motorcycle clubs from across the country donated. We tracked down the bank that held the foreclosure, negotiated a settlement, and reclaimed the deed. It's yours now, Lily. Completely paid off, completely yours." The magnitude of what he'd just told her hit with such overwhelming force that Lily's knees actually buckled slightly, and Jack caught her arm, steadying her as tears began streaming down her face. "This isn't possible," she managed. "This can't be real." "It's real," Jack confirmed. "Diane found your grandmother's old belongings in a storage unit the bank had them moved to before we could intervene. Everything's inside waiting for you. Photos, furniture, even some of those library books you mentioned." Lily walked through the front door with trembling hands, and the moment she stepped inside, the scent of the house, faint traces of her grandmother's favorite lavender candles, somehow still lingering in the walls after everything that had happened, brought her to her knees in the entryway, sobbing with a combination of grief and gratitude too complex to fully separate. "She should be here," Lily whispered, running her fingers along the same kitchen counter where her grandmother had once prepared dinner every evening after long shifts at the diner. "She should be seeing this." "Maybe she is," Diane said softly, having followed them inside. "Maybe she's watching every single moment of this prouder than she's ever been." As Lily processed the overwhelming gift of her reclaimed childhood home, the legal proceedings against Senator Hayes continued building toward what federal prosecutors increasingly believed would become a landmark conviction. Derek Holloway's detailed testimony, combined with Sheriff Boone's cooperation and the extensive financial evidence recovered from Meridian Capital Partners, created a case so thoroughly documented that Hayes' expensive legal team struggled to find viable defense strategies beyond delay tactics and procedural challenges. Then, 4 months after the initial confrontation on Canyon Road, the case took an unexpected turn that shocked everyone involved. "Hayes wants to negotiate a plea deal," Kim announced during an update session at Lily's newly reclaimed home, her expression carrying complicated satisfaction. His attorneys reached out this morning. Facing the weight of evidence against him, combined with Holloway's testimony and the financial paper trail, they're proposing a guilty plea in exchange for reduced sentencing recommendations. "What does that mean exactly?" Lily asked, sitting at her grandmother's old kitchen table, the same table where she'd once done homework as a much younger girl. "It means he's admitting guilt," Kim explained. "Federal prosecutors are considering the offer because it guarantees conviction without the uncertainty of a trial, and it eliminates the need for you to testify in an extended courtroom battle. But it also means his sentence might be somewhat reduced compared to what a jury conviction might have delivered." The prospect of avoiding a lengthy trial, of not having to endure cross-examination from Hayes' aggressive legal team, carried undeniable appeal. But something in Lily's expression suggested she was weighing the decision carefully, rather than simply grasping for the easier path. "Would he actually go to prison?" she asked. "Real prison, not some minimum security place where powerful people serve easy time. Federal racketeering and conspiracy to commit murder charges," Kim said. "Even with a plea deal, we're talking about a minimum of 25 years, likely more, given the severity of what he orchestrated. This isn't a slap on the wrist, Lily. This is genuine accountability." Lily considered this information with the same thoughtful gravity she'd shown throughout the entire ordeal, weighing her own need for closure against the practical reality of guaranteed justice versus the uncertainty of trial. "What about Boone?" she asked. "And Holloway?" "Boone's cooperation agreement includes a reduced sentence of 8 years, given his substantial assistance to our investigation," Kim said. "Holloway's looking at 15 years, also reduced for his cooperation testimony, though his direct role in planning the assassination attempt means prosecutors weren't willing to reduce his sentence as significantly as Boone's." "And the resort development?" Diane asked. "The casino project?" "Dead," Kim confirmed, something approaching satisfaction entering her voice for the first time. Once Hayes' involvement became public, every legitimate investor pulled out immediately. The Gaming Commission revoked all preliminary license approvals. Meridian Capital Partners is being dissolved through federal seizure proceedings, and the land Hayes acquired through Derek Holloway's intimidation campaign is being returned to its rightful owners, including compensation for the Whitfield family whose patriarch was murdered to protect this exact conspiracy. Lily absorbed this cascade of consequences with quiet, overwhelming satisfaction. Everything Derek Holloway and Senator Hayes had built through corruption, intimidation, and murder was collapsing, entirely dismantled by the courage of a homeless teenager who had refused to stay silent despite every reason the world had given her to disappear quietly. "I want to testify," Lily said, finally surprising everyone in the room, including herself. "I know the plea deal would be easier. I know it guarantees conviction without the risk of trial, but I spent 14 months being invisible, being ignored, being told my voice didn't matter. I want that senator to look me in the eyes while I tell an entire courtroom exactly what he tried to do. I want the record to show permanently exactly what kind of person he really is, not just the sanitized version his lawyers negotiate in a plea deal." Jack, who had remained quiet throughout the discussion, felt something powerful swell in his chest at Lily's declaration, recognizing in her words the same fierce, unshakable resolve that had first driven her onto that highway months earlier. "Are you certain?" Kim asked carefully. "Trial means extended exposure, aggressive cross-examination, months of additional stress before this reaches resolution." "I'm certain," Lily said, and for the first time since the entire ordeal began, her voice carried none of the trembling uncertainty that had once defined her. "I survived 14 months alone under a railroad bridge. I can survive a few months of testimony if it means Senator Hayes has to actually face what he did in front of the entire country." The trial, when it finally began 7 months after the initial confrontation on Canyon Road, became exactly the media spectacle federal prosecutors had anticipated, drawing national attention as one of the most significant public corruption cases in recent state history. Lily's testimony, when her turn finally came, unfolded across 3 grueling days of direct examination and aggressive cross-examination, and throughout every moment of it, she found herself drawing strength from the sight of Jack Diane and dozens of Hells Angels members filling the courtroom gallery, a silent, unwavering wall of support that Hayes' expensive legal team clearly hadn't anticipated when they'd initially dismissed the homeless teenager as an easily discredited witness. "Ms. Carter," Hayes' lead attorney began during cross-examination, his tone carrying practiced condescension. "You were homeless for 14 months prior to these events, correct?" "Yes," Lily answered steadily. "No stable housing, no consistent employment, no formal education beyond the 10th grade." "That's correct. And yet you're asking this jury to believe your uncorroborated account of overhearing detailed criminal conspiracy conversations that conveniently connect a wealthy state senator to serious felony charges." "My account isn't uncorroborated," Lily said, her voice steady despite the obvious attempt to rattle her composure. "Sheriff Boone confirmed the meetings I witnessed. Derek Holloway confirmed the conversations I overheard. The phone I recovered contained financial records matching exactly what I described hearing discussed. Every single detail I provided has been independently verified by federal investigators." The attorney's confident expression flickered slightly, clearly not having anticipated such a composed, factually grounded response from someone he'd expected to dismiss easily as an unreliable witness. "You've received significant media attention from this case," he pressed on. "Book deals, potential movie rights. Isn't it possible you've embellished certain details to enhance your own profile and financial prospects?" "I haven't signed any book deals," Lily replied, unable to keep a hint of steel from entering her voice. "I haven't pursued any media opportunities beyond what federal investigators required for the case. I didn't run onto that highway hoping for fame. I ran because 27 strangers were about to die and I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent." "But surely the attention hasn't hurt you," the attorney pressed. "You've received a house, you've received public sympathy, you've become something of a celebrity from this ordeal." Something shifted in Lily's expression, exhaustion giving way to fierce, controlled anger. "I lost my grandmother to cancer," she said, voice carrying across the silent courtroom with devastating clarity. "I lost my home to foreclosure while I was still grieving her death. I spent 14 months sleeping under a railroad bridge because every single institution in my hometown looked right through me. I watched 3 men plan to murder 27 strangers, and I had to decide whether to stay silent and safe or risk everything I had left, which admittedly wasn't much, to warn people I'd never met. If you think anything about that experience felt like winning some kind of celebrity lottery, you fundamentally misunderstand what I actually survived." The courtroom fell into stunned silence, and even the judge seemed to pause before instructing the attorney to continue with his questioning. But something had shifted in that moment, the jury's expressions carrying visible sympathy and respect that no amount of aggressive cross-examination could undo. The defense attorney, recognizing the strategic failure of his approach, attempted to pivot toward different lines of questioning, but the damage to his client's case had already solidified in the minds of everyone watching. Lily Carter wasn't the easily discredited, opportunistic witness Hayes' team had hoped to portray. She was exactly what the evidence, the testimony, and her own composed strength revealed her to be: a young woman of extraordinary courage who had risked everything to prevent a mass murder and expose systematic corruption. The trial concluded 11 days after it began, and the jury deliberated for just under 6 hours before returning with a verdict that sent shockwaves through the state's political establishment. Guilty on all counts: racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, public corruption, obstruction of justice. Senator Whitmore Hayes, once one of the most powerful figures in state government, stood motionless as the verdict was read, his expensive suit and carefully cultivated public image doing nothing to shield him from the devastating weight of complete legal accountability. Outside the courthouse, as news of the verdict spread through the assembled crowd, the sound of nearly 100 motorcycles revving in unified celebration echoed across downtown Phoenix, a thunderous tribute to justice finally served and to the extraordinary courage of the young woman who had made it possible. "You did it," Jack said, finding Lily in the chaotic aftermath of the verdict, pulling her into a fierce protective embrace. "You actually did it." "We did it," Lily corrected, tears streaming freely down her face as the accumulated weight of nearly a year's worth of terror, grief, and determination finally found release. "All of us, together." Sentencing, when it occurred 6 weeks later, delivered exactly the accountability Lily had hoped for. 40 years for Senator Hayes, effectively a life sentence given his age. 15 years for Derek Holloway. 8 years for Sheriff Boone, though his cooperation and genuine remorse during sentencing proceedings suggested at least some capacity for eventual redemption that the other two defendants notably lacked. As the legal proceedings finally reached their conclusion, Lily found herself standing at an unexpected crossroads. The desperate urgency that had defined her life for nearly a year, suddenly replaced by the strange, almost disorienting possibility of an actual future. "What happens now?" she asked Jack one evening, sitting on the porch of her grandmother's restored house, watching desert stars emerge overhead in a scene that felt achingly familiar, despite everything that had changed. "Now," Jack said, settling into the chair beside her, "you get to figure out what kind of life you actually want to build. Not survival, not just getting through each day, an actual future." "I don't even know where to start," Lily admitted. "Start with whatever your grandmother once believed you could become," Jack suggested gently. "You mentioned she wanted you to be a lawyer or a teacher. Somebody important," she said. "You think I could actually do that?" Lily asked, genuine uncertainty in her voice, despite everything she'd already proven about her own resilience and capability. "I think," Jack said, "that you documented a multi-million-dollar criminal conspiracy with nothing but your memory and instincts while surviving homelessness that would have broken most adults I've known. I think you testified against a siding state senator with more composure and integrity than most trained attorneys manage in their entire careers. I think there's very little you couldn't accomplish if you decided you wanted to." Over the following months, as the intense media attention around the case gradually settled into occasional follow-up coverage rather than constant scrutiny, Lily began the careful process of rebuilding her life with genuine intentionality rather than desperate survival. With financial support from the substantial fundraiser that veterans organizations had continued even after reclaiming her grandmother's house, and with her GED completed through an accelerated program Diane had helped her research, Lily enrolled in criminal justice courses at a community college, roughly 40 minutes from her restored childhood home. "Criminal justice," Diane said approvingly during one visit, reviewing Lily's course syllabus with genuine interest. "That makes sense, actually. You've got first-hand understanding of exactly how corrupt systems fail vulnerable people and exactly what it takes to hold them accountable." "I want to help other people who don't have anyone believing them," Lily explained. "People like I was before you all showed up. I want to actually understand the legal system well enough to help them navigate it." As Lily settled into her academic pursuits, the Hells Angels chapter that had first stopped for her desperate warning in that scorching desert highway began establishing something that would ultimately transform their annual memorial ride into something far more meaningful than its original purpose. "We've been talking," Jack announced during a club meeting Lily attended 6 months after the trial's conclusion, about creating something permanent, something that honors what happened here, and something that actually helps people going forward. The proposal that emerged from months of discussion and planning became the Lily Carter Community Safety Foundation, an organization funded initially through veteran donations and eventually through broader public support. Once the foundation's mission gained recognition, emergency housing assistance for homeless teenagers, scholarship funds for young people navigating circumstances similar to what Lily had survived, and crucially, an anonymous crime reporting hotline specifically designed to protect vulnerable witnesses from the kind of institutional dismissal that had nearly gotten 27 bikers killed on Canyon Road. "I don't know if I deserve to have something named after me," Lily said during the foundation's initial planning meeting, genuine discomfort evident in her expression. "You don't understand yet," Jack said, "exactly how much your courage matters to people who hear this story. Every homeless teenager who reads about what you survived, who learns that someone in your exact circumstances found the strength to save 27 strangers and expose a massive corruption conspiracy that gives them something most of them have never had before. Hope that their voice might actually matter too." The Foundation's first major initiative launched exactly 1 year after the initial confrontation on Canyon Road funding, emergency housing for 11 homeless teenagers in Cottonwood County alone, the same county that had once looked completely through Lily during her own desperate homelessness. As the Foundation's work expanded, drawing increasing attention and support from motorcycle clubs, veteran organizations, and eventually mainstream philanthropic institutions across the country, Cottonwood Flats itself underwent its own complicated reckoning with the community failures that had allowed Lily's suffering to continue unnoticed for 14 months. The town council, facing sustained public pressure following extensive media coverage of the case, implemented new protocols requiring mandatory follow-up services for families experiencing medical bankruptcy, expanded emergency shelter capacity, and established a community liaison position specifically focused on identifying and assisting at-risk teenagers before they fell through the exact gaps that had once swallowed Lily whole. "It's not enough to undo what happened," Lily reflected during a town council meeting she was invited to address roughly 18 months after her initial confrontation with Senator Hayes' operation. "But it matters that other kids won't have to survive what I survived, at least not without someone actually paying attention." As the second anniversary of that scorching desert afternoon approached, the Hells Angels prepared for their annual memorial ride with a modified route that had become tradition since the events on Canyon Road, and Jack found himself standing outside the same gas station where Lily had first sprinted into the highway, watching riders assemble for what had transformed from a simple veteran memorial into something considerably more meaningful. "You ready?" Jack asked, finding Lily standing nearby now. 19 years old, dressed in her own leather jacket that the club had presented her during an emotional ceremony marking her formal status as an honorary member, the first civilian in the chapter's history to receive such recognition. "Always," Lily said, though her smile carried none of the desperate terror that had once defined her presence at this exact location. The annual ride, as it had every year since the original confrontation, made its first stop not at the memorial site for fallen veterans, but at Lily's restored childhood home, where the extended Hells Angels community gathered briefly to honor both her grandmother's memory and the courage that had transformed a routine memorial ride into something the entire nation had witnessed and remembered. At the entrance to Canyon Road, where explosive charges had once waited to bring death to 27 innocent people, a permanent memorial marker now stood funded through the Lily Carter Community Safety Foundation and unveiled during a ceremony that drew hundreds of attendees from across the country. The inscription, simple and unadorned, carried words that captured everything the entire ordeal had ultimately proven true. One courageous voice saved 27 lives. Standing before that marker during its unveiling, Lily found herself surrounded by the people who had transformed her existence from desperate survival into genuine purpose. Jack, whose immediate belief in her warning had prevented catastrophe. Diane, whose gentle compassion had helped her process trauma she'd carried alone for far too long. Agent Kim, whose relentless investigation had brought accountability to a conspiracy that had reached the highest levels of state government. And dozens of Hells Angels members who had chosen in a single crucial moment to believe a homeless teenager when the rest of the world had spent 14 months looking through her entirely. "I used to think nobody would ever really see me again," Lily said during her brief remarks at the memorial's unveiling, voice carrying across the assembled crowd with a confidence that would have seemed impossible to the terrified girl who had once collapsed on scorching asphalt. "I used to think I'd disappeared completely. that I'd become invisible to a world that had already decided I didn't matter. But sometimes the person everyone has learned to ignore is exactly the person standing between ordinary lives and unimaginable tragedy. Sometimes the only thing separating catastrophe from safety is whether anyone chooses to listen when the person nobody trusts finally finds the courage to speak. As applause rippled through the assembled crowd, Jack stepped forward to stand beside her, placing a steady, protective hand on her shoulder, exactly as he had during those first terrifying moments on the highway nearly 2 years earlier. "She's right," Jack added, his own voice carrying the weight of everything they'd survived together. This entire nightmare started because 26 people almost ignored a scared, desperate teenager. It ended because one person decided to listen instead. That single decision saved 27 lives, exposed a murder conspiracy, brought down a corrupt state senator, and transformed a homeless girl who nobody believed into someone who changed an entire community forever. The viral footage from that original confrontation eventually faded from social media's constant churn of new content, as viral moments inevitably do, replaced by whatever crisis or celebration next captured the internet's fractured attention span. But the lesson embedded in Lily Carter's story never faded, never diminished, never lost its power to remind anyone who encountered it of an essential, unshakable truth about human courage and the devastating cost of institutional indifference. Lily Carter completed her criminal justice degree 3 years after that scorching desert confrontation, graduating with honors and immediately beginning work with the very foundation that bore her name, dedicating her professional life to ensuring that no other vulnerable teenager would ever again face the crushing isolation she'd endured beneath a forgotten railroad bridge. Jack Callahan continued serving as road captain for the Hells Angels chapter that had once nearly ridden past a desperate, screaming girl without stopping, though every member of that chapter understood now with absolute clarity exactly what might have been lost if they'd continued past that gas station without pause. And every single year on the anniversary of that fateful day, motorcycles from across the country still gathered outside that same forgotten gas station in rural Arizona, engines rumbling in solemn tribute to the moment an entire nation learned an unforgettable truth: that courage doesn't announce itself through wealth status or credibility, but through the simple, devastating willingness to stand between danger and strangers, even when every voice around you insists you don't matter. Even when you have absolutely nothing left to lose except the truth you refuse to stay silent about. Sometimes salvation arrives wearing borrowed shoes, running barefoot across broken glass, screaming warnings that nobody wants to believe. And sometimes, against every possible expectation, the world finally stops long enough to listen.